A bit like Alice. Tumbling down the rabbit hole?
You could say that.
I can see it in your eyes. You have the look of a man who accepts what he sees because he is expecting to wake up.
Welcome everybody, this is Team Rabbit Hole edition 288 with David Charles Plate, the central synchronizer, artist, editor, synchat, Sagittarius. Join the team as we get to know David, a genuine wellspring of esoteric and cultural awareness that has been at the forefront of sync-related research for over a decade, making mind-bending film, album mashups, and enriching conversations with all that he has picked up on the road he's traveled. Cowabunga. Well met.
Cowabunga. Yeah, I know. So I'm trying to think. I don't know if you consider yourself an editor, because I was like, how does one even, like, you do edit like timestamps and stuff, but I don't know if you think of that as editing. So we'll get to that.
Technically, like I use Pinnacle, whatever, you could use any program, but it's just like it's scientific in the way that every experiment that I do can be reproduced just using the components. So it's I don't actually adjust to, like, there used to be a thing like way back when, like in the late 90s, where it's like you could get like Dark Side of the Moon, The Wizard of Oz on like DVD with like surround sound or whatever. But there's like a few that like they also did that with. It's like play Alice in Wonderland with Pink Floyd's The Wall or whatever, and which is a cool idea because you want the trial at the end to line up with the trial in both. You know, the Wall ends with the trial. But the thing is that people would, if you knew the album well enough, you could see what people did. So it'd be like, you know, they have those little sample segments in between. So they make these little minor adjustments so that the next song would have the thing land on the moment
Not
that
a
they
pure
wanted to land on.
sync.
It's not pure sync. So like everything will go in sync to everything else to some degree. Like I've worked as a VJ at events and Burning Man and stuff, you know, and like I just know that that's the way it is. But what fascinates me is when it crosses a certain line, that if you're really paying attention, you're like, wait, and if it does it consistently enough. So that's what I'm after.
Uncanny sync valley or something. It's
yeah,
like, this can't be replicated. All right, so something, we'll get into all this, but thank you for the clarification, because I was like, I don't know if how much you're editing, but you're orchestrating or almost like arranging. It's like, here, this on top of this, and hit play and go. So something we do on the podcast is to take this number of the episode 288 and add it together and reduce it numerologically. So 2 + 8 is 10, 18, and that turns into 9. 9 is usually the hermit card, but in this deck, it's the alien. I bring back knowledge from distant places. Knowing your worth, you are perfect the way you are, being free, seeking answers within you, and going deeper to understand more of the universe, taking the time to do something you've never done before. Raphael, what do you got?
So this is the Wizard of Odd tarot deck by Brian Lahr, and the card you got, oh, how nice, is the Three of Cups. So here we have celebration, the conclusion of any matter in plenty, perfection and merriment, victory, fulfillment, solace, and healing. Of course, the party card, everyone knows this one. It's a good one.
And you can totally pull one if you'd like, David. If you don't, all good. Up to you. It's funny because I know you're I'm only aware of tarot and stuff because of listening to you on Always Records. Like you are the main line for my mysticism and waking up in a lot of ways, which I'll get into. So it's funny that we're reading meanings to you.
This show wouldn't exist without you, David. Jim just told me.
It's largely true. I'll get into that. But it's like between Always Records and 42 Minutes and maybe one or two other shows, I was like, that's what's up. Like, how do we do that? And then Raphael was like, you want to do a podcast? I was like, I got an idea or two. I've seen it done. And if they build it, they will come, kind of thing. So anyway, if you want to pull a card, I'll shut the fuck up.
So in front of me, I have the Tarot de Marseille, the Marseille Tarots, French tarot. This is Hodorowski's deck that he restored the Marseille Tarot. There's a great book that he did. What is it called? Something, the Master in the Cards or something like that. But where he explains it. But I got this deck. I got the Golden Dawn deck. Use that. I don't know if you've used that before. I got Crowley's deck here, Thoth deck, Rider deck, but then a very special deck that you won't see very often. It's called Kabbalistic Tarot, and this deck is like flashcards, because it just basically just gives you just the straight information. So here, where we go, like that, you know.
Oh yeah,
It's like
I
it
got
gives
you.
you.
I
It
think
gives
I
you
saw
all.
that one, or I even have it, I think. Yeah.
Oh really?
I
Oh,
think
yeah.
so. I think so.
Okay.
Well,
so I just
regale
popped
us
it
with
open.
whatever. Yeah.
6 of Swords. That's what I got.
Word. So I'm
Uh,
trying to think what that even is. I'm thinking 1 sword, 6 of swords.
Yatsura, Mercury in Aquarius. It's 1/4 of Tiferet is where it aligns with the Kabbalistic tree.
Raphael's holding up his deck.
Do you have
He's
a
got it
different
too.
one? Because this one is a German one. Maybe it's different one.
It's totally different.
It's
but
different, but
okay,
it looks
it
to
also
be
says-
the same. Yeah, you might
Yeah.
want to check with yours what it does with the Saudi Star issue, because you know sometimes they'll depending they may go with the Crowley Emperor Star switch, which is a really interesting subject if you guys want to talk about that. But
I mean,
yeah.
I totally want to talk about the adjustment strength switch, but I
Sure.
didn't know about this. Which one? Star and
adjustment strength. Yeah,
yeah,
so that's
811. But which
that's a
one are you
Roman
talking
numeral
about?
switch. This is a Hebrew letter switch.
Okay.
So there's tricks that you can do with the Crowley deck if you actually like. I find that it's best when it comes to the Arcana just to like ignore the Roman numerals and go by the Hebrew letter correspondences in order, and that's more revealing. I would argue. But you know, I see what Crowley did with the Saudi Star issue as kind of like a massive con, like a giant con. But I don't see it as Crowley's con. I see him as articulating something, the defect in the lower worlds. So like yes, there's an ultimate perfection, but if we're discussing the tree of life, there's that distinction between what it is that we're living in the midst of, in what we could call the sustaining order of the empire, which is distinct from the underlying order of the Kabbalistic tree itself. When we're relating to the tree in itself, in the Kantian sense, then you're looking at the Shefa and the emanated flow, how it's distributed to the tree. But when you're looking at how the Klipo temporarily rule the lower worlds, for lack of a better word, rule during the duration of the fall, then you're dealing with a different set of you know, so the tarot itself is like is representative. It's not the thing itself. So when you're relating to kind of this this template that we can, you know, like in the Zohar, the tree of life is never drawn, right? Like it's just described. So even the act of drawing it, you know, years after the 12th century, or you know, which would be we know that the Zohar is from as early as the 12th century. So, you know, since that time, you know, especially in medieval Kabbalah, it's represented and you see it drawn out. I even have it like tattooed on me. But traditionally, that's all meant to be visualized, you know, and it's a moving, living thing. So it's not static. So even to draw it is kind of misleading inevitably, because the Sephiroth are literally spiraling. You know, each in their own kind of dynamic, and like orbit isn't necessarily circular, it twists. So you'll find that all throughout Jewish mysticism is this recognition of the twist. And so that also relates dimensionally. So if you're talking about like the 7 lower Sephiroth as they relate to the supernal triad, there's that in dimensional shift from you know, Teferet to Keter, you know, like what we'd say is Gimel in the Golden Dawn system of correspondences. And so that's very significant, because then that you can kind of explain the Masonic G through that, which I almost never hear anybody talk about, if ever. You know,
I've heard you talk about it. Yeah,
you've heard me go off on it. Yeah.
Dude, I've heard. I mean, I'm not gonna say the same song and dance, but it's like you have been jamming on these cylinders for a hot minute, and it's above my pay grade because I don't do Kabbalah, but any Kabbalah I know is through you and Syncbook people. I wouldn't have even fucked with tarot really before Syncbook.
So it's probably also above my pay grade, but just because before I showed you the same deck, but this is actually the modern version with, you know, gold foil, and here it actually looks like something. Nice. In my version, it's the same deck almost, but mine looks so muddy because I used it for years. So this is the Fool, Wizard of Odd, and I'm just showing it because what Brian did is he added, you know, the Hebrew correspondence. He added like geomantic symbol. He added the Crowley definitions. He added the element, astrological symbolism, and most of them are actually like, how would you say, made by incense, photographing the incense and mirroring it. So actually, like evoking the
Very
spirit
similar
of
to what
it.
you do with your art, actually.
So
Now that I think about it,
it's pretty
mirrored montage.
Dude, I like the Wizard of Oz just right away, immediately. Like what that brings up for me is that, like, you know, David Bowie did did A Space Oddity, right? So Space Oddity, obviously referencing 2001: A Space Odyssey. They played it during the Apollo 11 launch on television. So when people watched the launch, they literally like got to listen to a song about heroin, which is pretty far out. But you know, 2001: A Space Odyssey happens to be the same length as The Wizard of Oz at 142 minutes, which is kind of fun. So you know, yeah. So like the amount of
That's the best way to
resonance.
put it.
Yeah.
Keep going. I don't mean to cut you off. It's like, holy
No,
shit.
it's fine.
All right,
Yeah.
so we're gonna clearly you are a rabbit hole, and I've always
10
been
minutes
like, how do
in
you
and
capture
already
a
everything
black
is
hole?
exploding.
Clearly, yeah. No, you and Andreas are like some of the people I've always been like, and I've talked to Andreas plenty, and you know Andreas personally, so it's just like Santa Cruz, man, pumping out some interesting monkeys. So you guys all touched the monolith, it seems. All right, so yeah, long story short, I mean, I guess before we go too much further, between the hermit card, but in this deck, the alien, ironically Bowie alien kind of stuffs. His your 6 of swords, which is about like kind of moving on, and calmer waters kind of mode, like letting the past.
I think leaving the Thoth deck, isn't that science? Science is what they titled that card, I believe. Where you got the six swords, and it's Tiferet, so it's a place. It's a place of balance, and you know it's
equilibrium, kind of getting it right. And then he had the 3 of Cups, which is very much like, you know, party city or whatever, you know, clanks of the Valhalla grog or whatever. So is there anything that pops for you resonantly in any of those cards or syncs up or whatever? If not, that's cool. I mean, obviously everything syncs, I get that, but it's like, is there anything off the top of your head between hermit card, but in this deck, alien, 6 of swords and 3 of cups?
Hermit is Virgo, gestation. I always found it really weird that the hermit card is a man, because what Virgo? So like you'll find in the small cards, it's like, what is that? The Prudence. Is that the 9 of discs, I believe, where it's the sun in Virgo? And so there's a recognition in that card of the feminine and gestation. But I always felt like the hermit should have been like a pregnant woman, like, but I guess they didn't want to be too explicit in that way or whatever. But yeah, it's kind of.
Or they were all monks, and they're like, you know what, we have to have our representation somewhere, and we're all just chilling up in these cloisters.
8 of discs.
8 of discs.
Yeah,
that's what's up. All right, so yeah, I mean,
8 of discs. Thank you. Yeah.
There you go.
8. I said 9. I stand reflected.
Cool.
I think I said 9 because hermit is 9. I'm mixing it up. Yeah.
You're all good. So yeah, Bowie deck. I mean, it's the alien in here, but you definitely, to me, seem like somebody who's been to the edge and come back and can report on it well. So not that everybody can always, like, I sit here even just now, I'm flabbergasted, like, all right, yeah, no, I didn't do my homework, teacher. Sorry, I have no clue what this shit is.
Yeah, what would it even mean to be an expert in the occult? Like, what would that take? Like, I don't care. Like, how much you like. No, I don't know about that. I've actually, I've met people who I would consider masters. You know, and they're very rare.
Mark Golding is a good example. You met him, up with him. He's a good example. But these are like embodied esotericists. Like, I think you're an embodied esotericist.
Mark Golding was a true spiritual master, for real.
I wouldn't doubt it. Yeah, I was trying to get him on here, but he passed. So it's like, oh, can't do that. But R.I.P. Mark. He's very much the hermit card, right? In that sense, syncing up right there. He was out in the woods doing his thing with light and alchemy.
I've only met him a couple times, and he had a bigger impact on me than almost anybody I've ever met. I can say
that's
that.
Gnarly.
Yeah.
All right. So speaking of that, I guess this is maybe a good as place as any to start with the single cell to multicellular organism you are now. Like, you grew up in Santa Cruz. Kind of give us the cultural layout. Like, what influenced you? What kind of books were you reading as a kid? Ambitions, dude. Yeah, all the way. I mean, I think you're raised Christian, but I'm not exactly sure. So it's
my mom was a Jew for Jesus, and so you know, so like when I was growing up in the elementary school I went to, there's aspects of it I could go off that were kind of like nightmarish or whatever, because it was like a very, very strict Christian school, But
Another brick in the
I had
wall
a
mode.
third grade teacher. I never talked about this. I don't think I've talked about this on a podcast that I can remember. But I had a third grade teacher named Miss Nieto at a Christian school. And I know now, looking back, I get it. It was like she was navigating, like, how do I, like, bring myself into this, and how do I deal with the dogmatic kind of like general like view of the school or whatever. But she had us read Lord of the Rings.
My Nana's watching that as we speak,
in
by the
third
way.
grade. And it was like, because she could make the argument, because J.R.R. Tolkien was a Catholic, yeah.
Right,
and
yeah.
so you have him with C.S. Lewis. Of course, his take is completely different. He's an anthropologist as well, so he's got a higher perspective on the scapegoat ritual and all these different things. So he knows, some things about Christianity. But anyway, yeah, this teacher she had us read Lord of the Rings throughout the year. It wasn't in the original curriculum, but she would have us chapter by chapter. We had to, on our own. There was no wrong answer really, but we had to see different things that we could relate to things in the Bible. So we go along and make those connections.
You up early on.
Yeah. She was one of my early sync teachers for sure. And it was just her way of dealing with the situation that she was in. She was like, "How do I reach these kids?" And she really.
I've always wondered that. Like, how does Moses tell the people, like, I've seen the tree? Like, I want you guys to fucking jam on these cylinders, but you aren't up there yourselves, metaphorically or otherwise. So it's like, how do you perpetuate culture? And you do have a sun in Sagittarius, I think exactly, if not like 1 or 2 degrees, conjunct your Mercury. So you've always struck me as like, you have climbed, just in reference to earlier, like, what is an esoteric, general or whatever. It's like, fuck all the titles and stuff. You've got the proof of pudding to me, and that's all that matters to me. Like, you're legit.
The most philosophical of all the signs, but I think it's a bunch of bullshit myself.
No, your song and dance is awesome. If only I had been at the sync. Well, I don't need to be there.
I'm quoting Jim Morrison, by the way, because he knew that it was bullshit, because he knew he was no Fucus. So when he says, "Of course, I'm a Sagittarius, the most philosophical of all the signs," but he's not just a Sagittarius; he's a no Fucus. That's why I think he said it was bullshit. So I think it's a bunch of bullshit myself, because that's not even my fucking sign. But yeah.
Right, it's a kind of a 22. Like, yeah, here's the net that you're trying to paint me with, and it doesn't fit exactly. So your teacher got you hooked on to the Lord of the Rings. I mean, that's a pretty, like I said, my Nana, as we speak, is watching Lord of the Rings maybe for the first time on Netflix because she's like sick. So I was like, hey, that's a 3-hour movie. Check it out. Or all of them, 9 hours. So that's a drug in and of itself. What were your impressions? What were you syncing with the Bible? How were you?
It was just we would go along, and I like that encouragement of because Christianity doesn't always encourage real, genuine, critical thinking. And so she knew that. So she was like, how do I encourage them to still have like an allowance to be critical while at the same time navigate? Because we're not being critical of the Bible, we're being critical of J.R.R. Tolkien. And so there's it's kind of like a little loophole there,
Totally.
But actually,
gap.
An even more influential teacher growing up was actually a tutor. When I was a freshman in high school, I was failing math. And my mom was upset, and it was this whole thing of like, I had to do better in math, and so I was really reluctant to get a tutor, and I was forced to. And my mom dropped me off at an office with somebody who I'd never met before to tutor me in math. The first day that I went in there, he showed me 2001: A Space Odyssey for the first time. So we had like a brief introduction. This is a true story, I swear to God. He turned off the lights. We watched 2001: A Space Odyssey. In silence.
The whole thing?
The whole thing.
Oh my God.
And then after yeah. And then after we watched it, he goes to me, he goes, "Hey, if you want to tell your mom what we did here, you're welcome to, but you don't have to." And so I was all like, I got all weird. Like, I felt kind of guilty. I was like, is this okay? Am I doing something wrong? Is this mom's paying this guy? Like, what the hell? So a week goes by. And I go again, second meeting with this guy. He turns off the lights. We watch all of Contact, which I don't think had been out for very long at that point. So we watch all of Contact. And then the third time and the final time I met with this guy, I got dropped off at his home, which is actually, the area of Santa Cruz. It was off Highway 17. In other words, it was in the woods. So I got dropped off at this guy's house in the woods, and this was much longer. So that was long enough for us to watch a movie each time. The last time it was like hours or something. And that is where my best life, and I went into he had to go off the mathematics.
Good book. Good book.
And then R.C. Clarke, Stanley Kubrick put together. There's an argument. Carl Sagan's Contact. And then the book related, in both cases, and then how they related to each other.
That's a goddamn modern Rosetta Stone moment, really.
And he's the first person to ever tell me about gematria. He was Jewish. He was very Jewish. He taught me that how it is that we discovered math and did not invent it. We merely invented the symbols to represent math, but math itself is something that we discovered, and that language and math are absolutely the same thing. So like basically we did not write out numerals as we do today. It was literally the letters. And so people were speaking in math, and their relationship to math was radically different. I went from failing math within a semester. I did much better in a quarter, but within a semester I went to getting straight A's in math.
It was like the Popeye spinach there. I mean, straight up.
He just because he was the first person to show me the significance of math. No teacher before him that I'd ever had and he was able to do that in 3 sessions, and 2 of those sessions were showing me movies. And now I go off about 2000. I got fucking, I can see this camera here. I got Kubrick tattooed on my arm, and it's like he introduced me to 2001. When I was a kid, I remember picking up the box of 2001 because I was super into Star Wars. I was like, Mom, can I rent this? And she goes, you won't like that. It's boring. You won't like that.
Well,
God works in mysterious ways.
Right? Like Mom says no, but Holy Spirit's gonna be God you somewhere else, I guess. So what the fuck? I mean, that's not. I'm presuming he's passed, but he might still be alive. I don't know. Is he still around and doing shit?
What, the tutor?
The math teacher. Yeah. What's his shtick?
That's the last. I had 3 meetings with that guy. I never saw him since. I never tried to contact him or anything. But so impactful. And I wonder, like, did he do that with other students? Was that like his thing? Was that tailored? Like, was he just being like, I don't know. So it's like, I live with Bill Klaus. Bill Klaus is a teacher, and he's always trying to figure out, like, how do I reach these kids? It's challenging, especially in today with the kids. They got their mini monoliths in front of them, and they're using them all the time. It's like, how do you deal with technology and get people interested in something that's not in their what they're magnetized towards, because they're not magnetized towards that. So it's like it's a very difficult thing, and I'm oriented the way that I am anyway, so I've always been a little weird. So I mean, that worked for me. Would that work for other students? I have no idea, but it definitely worked for me. Yeah, I think it's like that Hunter S. Thompson thing. It's like drugs might not work for everybody, but they work for me.
Yeah,
I wouldn't recommend them to everybody, but hey,
not every monkey needs to trip. Well, I don't know. I've always suggested people should trip once in their life just to know how the other half is. I mean, it's like go see dark matter for a minute or whatever is going on. It's just like,
but then you'll meet somebody like Will Morgan or something. It's like, dude, I don't even think you need to fuck around. Like you're already naturally this way. I don't know.
It depends depending on meditations and stuff. So fascinating. I wish I knew some of his models and his work, like his original work. Like, was he fucking with Mobius strips, or what was his trip? Because I don't have a whole paralleling with you, but back when I was in high school, basically at some point I had this kind of nervous breakdown that was stress and drug induced, and I was just like, I think I've had the revelation. And I actually had just read 2001: A Space Odyssey. I mean, there's a whole lot of things. I was turning on a lot of levels, and I did not have a fucking shepherd at all. And I was just like, what? And I was doing mushrooms. So basically I saw the as above below kind of epiphany. I was just like, everything's a fractal, but this isn't like 2000 when YouTube isn't a thing, and I don't know who to talk to or what to do.
Right.
But this math teacher, ironically, was like, you should watch 2001 and Easy Rider and you'll be fine. I was okay. And I did. And I was like,
totally. Dude, well, my I keep talking about my folks, but my folks, 4 or 5 years ago, they went to go to New Orleans. And they asked me if I had any suggestions of someplace they should go. I was like,
the graveyard.
Go to the graveyard. Go to the graveyard where they actually trip balls in real life. Those girls, like, I was like, go there. And they went there. They thanked me for it afterwards. I was like, that was a good suggestion. I wouldn't have thought, but that was a good suggestion.
Good Yelp reviews. The graveyard with the acid resonance from 60 years ago. It's funny because I'm like an hour from there. I'm down in Fairhope, Alabama, near Mobile, basically, right now. It sucks. Don't come. But here's nice. But it's kind of like I don't even know the Beverly Hills of the area. But it's the Deep South, man. As that video portrays, it's like it's not. It's come a long way since then. But my God, it's a little more closed off. It ain't Santa Cruz. So so you're growing up, failing math.
Well, Santa Cruz ain't Santa Cruz anymore. So whatever. you know.
Things change. The
Yeah.
the Hal Dowells. You were growing up with the I guess I don't know if it's the banana slugs or what, because I almost
Yeah.
went to school out there. Yeah,
Yeah,
I was like,
UCSC
oh
has the
shit.
banana slugs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What did you start? Okay, I mean that's a big red pill, so to speak. Clearly it shifted your focus at that point. Once you've been Kubrick initiated, and given kind of Gnostic fucking transmissions from a Jewish teacher, the whole situation that went down. I mean,
Yeah,
that is.
totally.
I'm glad you told us that, because that is beautiful. It's like, spicy meatball. It's like, it's great. That's what sets the tone for your record. So what was after? Like, what were you doing after that? All of a sudden, were you just like, oh shit, I see the light, or like, how did you process this?
I dropped out of high school when I was a junior,
Word.
while I was getting straight A's, actually. So
Reasoning
like,
being,
I wasn't
like,
happy.
fuck this. Yeah,
I wasn't
okay.
happy. I never liked institutions, and so like I reached somewhat of a breaking point where I was like, I literally was I was meditating under a redwood tree during lunch. You know what I mean? Like
You're probably getting more education in that scenario, honestly. Straight
and
up.
so yeah, I dropped out for a year. So I went to Davis, and I was supposed to go to Davis High, and I went like 2 days, and then the rest of the time I just pretended to go to high school, and instead of riding my bike to the high school, my sister went to UC Davis, so I was living with my sister, and I would ride my bike to the college. And back in those days, I don't know what it's like now, but you could just sit in on any class. So I took a bunch of civil rights classes that I never actually enrolled in, and
you started grokking the civic situation. What was okay? What was your impression? You're like, fuck this place, like America's the hell. Like, how did that shift your politic? I mean, it is what it is. It's more liberal, and I don't mind that, but it's like they've got kind of a way of thinking, I think, out in California, especially Santa Cruz, I imagine. I mean, it ain't Berkeley, but it's kind of that ilk, more or less. How did that shift your child, your fragile eggshell mind or whatever? Like, what that had to have some effects. Yeah.
Of which part of going to
Well,
Davis and taking classes, or what do you mean?
yeah. The more I think about it, our lives parallel each other. In my junior year, I almost dropped out because I was like over it, and they were like, "Go dual enroll." So I was doing philosophy classes at the community college.
Well, I had to go somewhere every day, and then like that's the thing is like, am I going to go? In Davis they have a place called Murder Burger, which they've now changed to Red Rum Burger, and they have the best ostrich burgers. But yeah, and they use like the Jack Nicholson logo or whatever. So sometimes I'd ride my bike out there, after. But the thing is that it was like to have that freedom. Like you go to high school, you're there all day. I remember there was a turning point for me at Aptos High in Santa Cruz where I was sitting in class one day and I watched a guy trying to climb the fence, and this was after Columbine or whatever. We had barbed wire, and this guy, I remember him watching him. This kid just gets stuck in the barbed wire, and he was like hanging there, and I was just like, no other kids in the class like noticed, and I was just like looking out the window, and I was just like, there's a guy fully just wanting to escape. I was like, this is a fucking prison. And it struck me like what a prison it was, like watching that. I was like, he's, and then he eventually fell on the other side and ran away into the woods. Jesus. And it was like, but I like that about the university was that I could walk in and out as I pleased. I had complete freedom. I didn't have to be there. I could do whatever I wanted. And so, yeah, I mean, we the civil rights classes at Davis at that time, I mean, the institutions and what's become of them, like I don't know all of that. Like I don't have a basis for comparison beyond what I experienced, but I'd barely even talk to people. I'd just go and sit in the class, and and that was that.
This doesn't surprise me in a way. I mean, this strikes me.
My sister might see me because my sister went to the college, so I was like, I'm like supposed to be in high school, but I'm like just like hanging out at the college all the time. But yeah, you asked me a question, my fragile eggshell mind.
Was there anything that was hitting you? I mean, civil rights is a big deal. If you're watching kids get barbed wire trying to escape Guantanamo High or whatever, it's like not fun. So when you got there, you were like, oh, the whole situation's shit all the way up. Like, what were you? I mean, were you starting to get informed more? I'm pretty apolitical at this point, personally. I mean, you can be whatever you want. I'm just like, it's a whole shit show out here, and nobody has.
Well, this is a history lesson. So they talk a lot about Berkeley. One of the most incredible things I've ever fucking seen on television was when I was a kid during the first Iraq War. They used to have these. I don't remember what they
televised war.
They called them where they would have politicians. I believe it was an annual thing where the students had the opportunity to ask politicians questions, and it'd be a big crowd and in like an auditorium. and I remember this being on television during the war, and the kids, one stood up and said, they provided us with the questions to ask, but we're not going to read those questions. We're going to read our actual questions that we have. And it scared the shit out of those politicians. I think there was like 2 guys on the stage. I'd love to find video of this. Maybe I should put in a request to Berkeley or whatever if I could figure out those years, because it shouldn't be too difficult to find, because I know it was during the war.
I'm sure it
Because
burned in their psyches. They're like,
and
holy
every
shit.
they would try and stop it, and the children would, it was live, and the children would get up and they would say 1, 2, 3, 4, we don't want your racist war, over, just shouting it. And they asked real questions, and those guys were basically put in their place. And like, you know, when it comes to activism, I don't have any interest in any form of activism that you can't directly see the causal link between what it is that you're doing and what it is that you're protesting or trying to achieve. And so, in other words, like boycotts, they work. Boycotts can work. They're a reasonable form of protest. If you want to block traffic, if you're a bunch of students at a college and you want to block traffic for, say, animal rights, they're putting lipstick on cats, I don't know, like if they want to block traffic, they're just going to piss everybody off. Nobody's going to reflect on the issue in a serious way. They're just going to be frustrated with them. If all your activism is frustrating the hell out of people, then that's not real activism. And nowadays, you can't. It doesn't work the same way as it did in the 60s. Because if you want to go someplace and hold a sign with a group of people or whatever, like MLK's thing in Washington, like that worked. That was a statement. It got attention. We hear that speech over and over again. The I Have a Dream speech, like that worked. But now we have the internet. You can, if you want your words out, you don't have to go to a place and hold a sign. And a lot of what came out of Occupy was that, you know, any group of people gathered, if you're carrying your fucking cell phone, they got your information, and they know that you're somebody who's not going with the program. You know, Alan Green had a thing happen to him with Ground Zero, and I believe he talks about it a bit in Hindsight 2020. And you know, it's not what it used to be. All the rules are changed, you know. Yeah.
Well, we sure as fuck aren't like pigeon or feather and tarring people. I mean, it's if you start thinking about like our origins as a nation or whatever, back then the protest. I mean, obviously the Sons of Liberty, little kind of sync click maybe kind of thing, where they're like, hey, let's get some shit done. But I've always been, how do you speak truth to power without becoming what you don't like yourself?
There you go. Yeah. So that's like the Marilyn Manson thing. He was writing a book on that that never came out except for one chapter. But it was a fictional story. What was it called? Coma White, where it was like it's in a sense like him just it's super egotistical. It's almost like All That Jazz, where it's like self-indulgent or whatever. But it's this idea that if you're having to fight to get to where you're trying to get to, and you're having to fight people that you are trying to help. You're like, I'm trying to help these people, but I'm having to fight the whole way. You'll get to a point where when you finally get that platform, you end up hating. This isn't a rule. Like, this is just what it is. But this can happen where you end up hating the people who you were fighting for. And I think this happens with a lot of people who start out with a certain intention of why it is that they're going in the direction that they're going, and they lose. You know, they say the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think that's because of Cerberus guarding the gates of hell, that he had the 3 heads, according to Alice Bailey. One represented desire, one sensation, and one good intentions. So it's like this idea that, you know, hey, it's Pulp Fiction. I came into this thing with the best intentions, you know. I'm sorry things got so fucked up with me and Mr. Wallace, you know. It's like, no, it doesn't matter, dude. Like, you know, but at the same time, like, yeah, there's something energetically that can happen where you end up, like, you know, hating the people that you actually at one time cared about.
And actually George Orwell made a good point back in the day, because he was raised kind of privileged, but he was more of a socialist, I think, or kind of on that wave, and dealing with, you know, these kinds of bougie reforms. And he noticed at some point, he was like, a lot of these people are just bitter. They're not actually here to help the lower class. They just hate rich people, basically.
Yeah, totally. And that's always the issue with that Marxist thing, because you're like, okay, so if the proletariat, you know, defeats the bourgeoisie and gets their positions of power, they take the means of production. If the whole thing happens, who's to say that they won't just become the very thing that they were so opposed to? Because once you have it, exactly. It's so standard, you know, and that's
so human, so predictable. It's apes hitting each other with fucking bones or whatever, thigh bones.
Right.
So,
and at the same time, this doesn't excuse the upper classes because people are doing what they're
correct.
doing, you know, and
Yeah.
that's the thing, you know, and also when you're dealing with, you know, wealth by scale, it's so insane. Like the level of distinction between, say, a millionaire and a billionaire. And so you'll have Americans that are like, oh, well, at this point, they're like, I'm a millionaire because they're going by 80s, 90s standards and everything before. And it's like, dude, that doesn't mean what it used to mean. And so so this is so my dad was like super into Trump. So like they used to watch The Apprentice, you know, my folks did, and they moved to Idaho at a certain point, and I used to get in these huge debates with my dad all the time, you know, about Trump while he was in office. And then at one point we never got another fight again because my dad, he said to me, he expressed something to me. He was like, you know, I drive past these mobile home parks in Idaho, in Weiser, Idaho, and he was like, and I see the Trump flags, and I think to myself, I know why I voted for him, but I don't know why these people are voting for him. And I said to my dad, well, think about this: a billionaire sees you and says to himself what you just said. Do you think that that's, you know, it's all, and when you're looking at wealth by scale, it's so, the distinctions are so extreme. There's less of a gulf between my father and those people in the mobile home park than there is between the billionaire and my father by like an insane degree. Like they're worlds apart.
Lifetime's worth of
totally
earnings.
Yeah.
So just as you mentioned Trump, and he's of course very controversial, and what I hadn't seen until recently is an interesting clip by our dearest beloved woman, Marina Abramovich, who, by the way, got one of the highest decorations of Austria, which is where I live, strangely enough. And she actually talks about him and says like, oh, he is so wonderful. He is the best chaos magician. And I was like, wow, I never heard that. So it's interesting that that's her view.
Right. I have a theory about her, actually, because I read her book, Walk Through Walls, I think it was called. And I saw her exhibit in Stockholm. And I had to contemplate. And I don't know what the fuck I could tell you about that exhibit and things I saw. It's pretty crazy. But I think I don't know this, but I think she's trolling. I think she's trolling everybody, especially the elite. And people are like, oh, I'm so sophisticated. I'm hip to this artist, whatever. She's all hanging out with whoever the fuck that is, the Rothschilds or the Rockefeller. I can't remember, but she's like, you know, I'll pose for you with this thing, whatever, all of this shit. Oh yeah, stick a vagina in your pussy. That'll help you. Like all these things that, like, so she kind of reminds me of like a Hadarowski, Yoko Ono. So she's been around as long as Yoko, hasn't she? I forget. But it's Yoko's like singing. Jesus. Point being, I think she's fucking trolling them. I think she's literally outing these people by their own volition. Like they're literally like doing it themselves. Sure. And like she's just like facilitating.
She's pretending to be drunk, and then all the alcoholics come out and they're like, well, look, this is their scene, I guess, or whatever, that mode.
Yeah. Hey, somebody just said in the comments, Stephanie Scott, that would be the ultimate performance art. That's what I'm saying. I'll tell you something else that would be some ultimate performance art. If I have a completely different view on this thing, like when people talk about if Michelle Obama's a dude, like, oh, Michelle Obama's a dude, you can see her dick through her dress, all this kind of stuff. There's a whole argument there.
A whole wing of thought.
No, I don't fucking care. But what would be? But the difference with me is that I'm just like, holy shit, that would like maybe outdo Paul is Dead just by the irony of that. Like people fighting for gay rights and all these things. If they managed to get a trans person into the White House and managed to not just that 2 terms, like just hanging out there, like if that's real. Like I'm like standing ovation all the way. Holy shit!
David, you know, I'm gonna stand there with you and applaud. You can check out something interesting on Odyssey, which is literally called First Lady Boys of the United States. And all it does is it shows you the pictures and before the painting, supposedly, of the supposed first ladies of America. And if you look at them only with a slightly different eye, you're like, these are like dressed up Oddfellow guys or whatever the F is happening, but pretty much all of them. It's insane if you look at it that way. It's really, and with Michael, of course, it's pretty obvious. And there's even old pictures playing basketball. I mean, by now everything could be AI, of course, but seems real enough with Mike. It seems like a clear case.
Right. Totally. Melissa here says a Slav would never troll for trolling's sake. And what I'll say to that is, let me qualify. I'm not just saying I said she's trolling the elite. I'm also talking about like another level of subversive activism, and this isn't just trolling. This is like was said by Stephanie here, that would be performance art. And so, and performance art is also a form of activism because they're encouraging people to reflect. If people happen to feel uncomfortable or whatever, it's not like, you know, when you have like a shock musician who does shock for shock's sake, or a shock jock or whatever. It's you know, it's kind of distinct, you know.
Howard Stern's Fart Man is not at the same level as Marina sitting across from you and letting you stare at her for X amount of minutes, and
right, which is actually a profound practice, and I recommend that to anybody if there's somebody that you're that comfortable with to a degree that there's a level of trust to just sit and not speak and just things will happen. You'll start, people's faces will start to change. You'll start to get kind of this visionary experience, and it's very vulnerable, and it's that being okay with that state of exposure. Like, I think that's very healthy. In fact, I will go so far to say that, you know, like, I have a friend who was raised in Scientology, and it's like, I am not down with Scientology on so many levels. It is fucked up. But at the same time, those practices in and of themselves, if you just remove the after the fact where they're like, okay, now L. Ron Hubbard, thank the man and whatever the fuck, and the organization, all that. If you take all of that away and you just look at some of the practices that they do, I think that they're actually really powerful and could be really helpful to people if they weren't attached to this organization that has its own agenda. You know, it's kind of a catch-22 a bit. Yeah.
From what I read, there's an unauthorized biography for L. Ron Hubbard, and there's like maybe one or different books by ex-Scientologists, and what you mentioned, the staring technique actually is TR0, if I remember correctly. So it's like the first thing you do, but it seems gruesome because they say, oh, you have to stare into each other's eyes like for hours until everyone's crying like crazy. So you really, and then, well, of course, they
approach is right? Yeah. Then it's more like est, the you know, really extreme types of therapy where people, they won't let people urinate. So if you gotta go, you just let it out, you know, that kind of shit. You know, it's like, it's kind of
talk about a bonding experience. I mean, at that point, you're just like, well, you are my mother, I guess, or I trust you fully, implicitly. Beck is the only cool thing to come out of Scientology, I think.
There's a few cool things to come out of Scientology.
Like, what
else? And Beck is one of them.
Yeah, because he's like the Frank Zappa of the 90s and 2000s in my mind. Like, he kind of went more soft country-ish lately, which is fine. More Neil Young phase or whatever's going on. But his old stuff, man, the mixed media, you're a mixed media artist, you get it. So it's like he was doing a lot of
Beck did an incredible album with Charlotte Gainsbourg called IRM, and that's actually my favorite Charlotte Gainsbourg album, and I'm a huge Charlotte Gainsbourg fan. I actually managed to get a letter to her about sync stuff. I went to a show with my friend, and I had written it on the train on the way to San Francisco, and I put it in I had it in an envelope. And I was standing there in front of the stage, and there was like a distance between, like, they have the rail or whatever, and there's like these security guys walking back and forth, and somebody asked one of the security guys if they could put these 2 red roses up in the center of the stage for her, and he said yeah, and he took it. And so I asked another security person if he could take my letter and put it on top of the roses. And I'm standing next to the person, and they were not happy about it, but they didn't say anything. I could see it because it gave the appearance that the letter was like attached to the roses, like as though it were a love letter. It was not a love letter. It was about some stuff with their father, and just, you know,
jazz musician. Right?
What's that?
Was he like a jazz musician, composer type?
Yeah, Serge Gainsbourg was Charlotte Gainsbourg's father, and he was like a master of sexual innuendo, and he was so funny, like, and he was influential across the world. So like that song, like Lollipop or whatever, like Lollipop, Lollipop, like that wasn't a Serge Gainsbourg song, but it might as well have been. Like, they took that from him. That was his whole style, you know. So it's like you could get away with having things on the radio that everyone knows what you're talking about. Sure, not everybody, but you know, like, some people are just like, oh, I like lollipops, you know. But I love stuff like that. I love it, like that issue in the 50s and 60s especially, where it's like, if you wanted to say something and you had to be so poetic to get it to be able to be permitted, you know, like 1 and 1 and 1 is 3, gotta be good looking because he's so hard to see. So obviously about it, that whole song about a guy like 3 ways, and they go through line by line telling you, oh no, this is about, they'll have a whole elaborate explanation, and it doesn't mean that it's one or the other necessarily, but it's like the Beatles would have like triple meanings, you know. It's like Moonlight Drive from the Doors. That is so obviously about having sex with somebody who's menstruating and being like, we don't have to, at least ideally, not having to worry about somebody getting pregnant. Like that's over. That's why you listen to the end of the song. It says "Baby's gonna drown tonight." Like that's the song. But like that played on the radio. They played that on the radio. That's incredible. You know,
the Doors
like
were ahead of their time. You know this. I mean, they were coming out in like 65, 66 or whatever it was. It's like, what the fuck? I forget the years because like Sgt. Pepper's is 67. I mean, and years back then were like large chunks of time in radio art play. Like nowadays, it's like, you know, TikTok.
Right.
Back then, it took a while for things to happen. Quick thought on Charlotte Gainsbourg. It's funny because I don't know what syncs you know about her and Air, the band Air. They work with them a little instead of Beck. So now I'm like, were they all like hanging out and just like getting high and doing stuff? Because it seems like on 10,000 Hertz Legend, Beck guests on The Vagabond, but also Gainsbourg did something with them. I think the song's called 555.
That's the name of the album too. That's the title song.
Okay. I think it's her song, and then or her thing, and then they were like, "We're the musicians on it," or whatever happened. But yeah, it seems in a weird way that's kind of how I feel about like sync book people and what we do on Team Rabbit Hole. It's like it seems like little cliques of people cross pollinate enough where it's like, of course, if they're sitting around and they're in the same socioeconomic class essentially, and they're artists and they're on tour or whatever, it's like, hey, yeah, Beck, come over here and let's record a song really quick, and it's like, all right, cool, dope. So we can keep, you know, you grew up, you didn't go to school, you did the dropout thing, but got the college education side, you know, secondhand smoked college education. So
that was even less than a year, but yeah, it's worth sharing.
You got what you needed. So, but you seem like a very, I mean, obviously a sponge of information. Your Mercury is conjunct your Sun, so it's like you're learning whether there's a fucking textbook or not. It seems like life is the textbook. That's why that Kubrick kind of download from that guy was so profound, because that's a fucking key, you know, like a golden key. So, where were you starting to go after that, like directionally? I mean, I know you used to do stuff with Burning Man. Maybe you still do, but when did you start making art and all this kind of? I'm trying to get my head around your process.
I did 8 years of Burning Man in a row, and when I would go to Burning Man, I would be there for at least 3 weeks at a time, generally, because we would set up one of the largest sound camps on the playa, and that was Nexus. But yeah, no, I mean, let's see. I got a job at a coffee shop laundromat, and I used to play chess with people all the time. And
I'm not worried about how you made the loot. I'm more like,
no.
Like,
but that is intellectual, because that's the thing, is that like it was a very what is this? Oops, something went wrong. Right?
I have no clue. I just thought that
okay, whatever. No, it's just, you know, is Santa Cruz, downtown Santa Cruz. It was the place where I worked, was voted, I forget what it was, I think it was like 8 years in a row, was voted to be the #1 place in town to meet a partner. So it's like, because it's a coffee shop and a laundromat, so you're doing your coffee and then people are talking. I would see people show up in the course of working there separately, and then eventually they'd be bringing their laundry in together, like that kind of stuff, you know. It's just like and I could play my own music. It was like, you know,
you were a little DJ. You were what were you playing at that kind of environment? I might ask.
I would DJ on and record my stuff onto cassette at that time. And this is like whatever, 1999, 2000 or whatever. And I would bring the cassette into work the day after I would do it. I just keep testing my set on sets on, you know, the space, because like Empire Records is actually based off of Tower. I got a good friend who worked at Tower for years, and actually those stories in Empire Records are actually inspired by real stories. I could go through them if you want. It's pretty fascinating, actually.
So, semi-autobiographical
yeah, it's real stuff. Like a guy really did steal money from the safe and take it not to Atlantic City, I forget it. I think it may have been Reno. It could have been Vegas, but anyway, yeah, he did that. He didn't keep his job like he does in the movie, but he was never asked to pay that money back, because the owner of Tower Records thought it was so fucking hysterical. So he was like, "You did what?"
That's a chill boss. That is like big
very chill boss.
Yeah. I mean, it's like 80,000, whatever, man.
Yeah. So there's a woman who used to come into the laundromat who lived at Mount Madonna Center when Babaji was still alive, and I would talk to her pretty regularly. Her name was Dawn. I ended up years after, so I moved to Mount Madonna from that job. So I actually I put in my I quit the job before I even knew that I was going to live at Mount Madonna. But I the day after I quit,
Premeditated
I drove
ascension.
up to Mount
You're like,
Madonna,
"Fuck
which is
this."
like I live in Corralitos, Watsonville. I know this doesn't mean anything to viewers. You don't know where, you know, but I'm in Santa Cruz. But I
Mm.
lived in a certain part of the county that is at the base of this mountain. So it's not a huge mountain, but you know,
Right.
but you drive up a mountain, it's like right by my house. And so like growing up, I knew of Baba Hari Das because my parents used all. I grew up having to work at a laundry, you know, during summer and other, you know, my dad would get me up at like 5 a.m. to roll quarters every morning. So like that, not every morning that I wasn't in school, but a lot. So it's like I had a little stepping stool ladder, and I would go and I'd collect all the quarters and I'd put them in a machine, and they'd go down a slot, and then I'd like line up all the rows of quarters or whatever. So anyways, I was a laundromat person, and we used to wash clothes for Mount Madonna. My parents did. And movies, including like what, The Lost Boys and Killer Clowns from Outer Space and stuff. But anyway, so like I knew of it, and so I drove up there, and I just didn't leave for 17 months. And so I said I got a tent, and I moved in. I did work trade, and that was like a real shifting point in my life. You know, I got expelled from Christian school when I was in what was that, 7th grade. I gave a kid a concussion because he ran at me and went to kick me, and not even thinking about it, I just lifted his leg straight up. So he like went to kick me, and I lifted his leg up, and he fell on the back of his head on concrete and had a concussion. And they told me because it was self-defense, they said I wasn't expelled, but I wouldn't be invited back. And so I
what an open-handed gesture. It's
yeah. So
good luck.
So anyway, flash forward. Yeah, so I ended up studying Patanjali under Baba Hari Das for about 6 years. And I actually I traveled to India with Babaji and worked at an orphanage, and I traveled in the foothills of the Himalayas for a bit. And while I was at the orphanage, I was able to study Patanjali every day with an instructor. And so, you know, I was confronted with a choice at a certain point. Like I knew I would qualify for birthright to go to Israel, where they pay for all this stuff. But if you go and you study in a yeshiva, it's like you're not going to get a look at the things that I wanted to be able to look at. I was really wanting to look at more esoterica. You know, somebody says, "Hey,
syncing up with you."
What's your name? Where are you from? I don't know.
It's like, hey man, that was me. And I'm
oh my god!
So I don't know much about Babaji or Patanjali. I mean, Patanjali's yoga, I think, and
Patanjali's where we get the oldest recording of written yoga. So, like the first person that we know of to write down yoga, that was Patanjali.
He's like the Moses of the 10 Commandments of yoga, essentially.
So pretty much, yeah. But keep in mind that yoga in this context, we're not talking like
dogmatic like that. It's more just
we're talking about the practice. It's Ashtanga yoga is an 8-limbed tree. So like when people talk about yoga, you say stretching, that's asana, right? That's one limb of the tree. You say karma yoga, bhakti yoga, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, there are all these different expressions of how you relate to yoga. So you know, when you're actually studying Patanjali intellectually, you know, that's Gyan Yoga. So you have a different, you know, it's an intellectual thing. And so I took classes with Babaji and all the older members of the community for 6 years. And you know,
that's a hot minute.
That was a huge focus of my life, and and that's with Babaji. So it's like, you know, he that was amazing to be able to. He hadn't spoken in 60 years when I met him. So he wrote on a board. It's like someone here mentioned somewhere down there about silence. So like I did a couple years in my 20s of complete silence, where I'd write on a little chalkboard, you know. And so I did 5 months one time. I did 3 months other times. It added up. Has anybody thought of taking a vow of silence? There you go. Yeah.
Vipassana stuff.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And so I did Vipassana too. Vipassana's great. That was up in Napa area. Just the 10 days of silence. 10 hours a day for 10 days of meditation.
Yeah, it'll change your biochemistry, I'm imagining, and your focal points and all that.
Totally. I stayed at Zendo's multiple times. I stayed at a Zendo in Shasta for few weeks at a time. And in that case, you actually didn't close your eyes. You actually stare at a piece of white canvas for whatever that was, also probably 10 hours a day.
I'm sure that does the similar thing as to the eye. I mean, not exactly, because the human interaction with the electromagnetics and all that stuff with staring at a person in front of you, Scientology style. But same idea. You're going to start having disorienting kind of
Just
psychedelic
as you
experiences, I'm
mentioned,
sure.
white wall, and that's, I think, oftentimes where it's seen best. And it's usually just very strange phases in my life that I can't define when I can see it. There's a term for it called mouche volante, which is French. It means like flying flies or something, flying, and these like pixelated things. Or if you look at the sky and it's a clear blue sky and you suddenly see these things flowing around, and then people are arguing, oh, is it bacteria on your eye? And I'm like, I don't know how that would work. You know what I'm talking about? It's like sensation, or this level of perception. I don't know. I was about to ask you what you think, what that is or means, or what it could be, but because you probably saw it a lot staring at that wall.
He's seen some flies.
I can say with my experience of Vipassana and meditation in general is that it's literally this. It's the space between. It's like the gaps. So like, and with Vipassana, it's very specific. All you're really doing is you're just following sensation. That's it.
Yeah,
you're not doing anything else. Like, so they'll start on the tip of your nose, and you'll put all of your attention as best as you can on the tip of your nose. And and then around day 3, there's a potential shift. Not everybody experiences it. Some people just get more and more frustrated. But basically, what it is that when the air hits your nose, it's very subtle, and if you can draw all your attention to that, there's basically a pyramid in your face. So it goes up to your nose, and then it goes down again into your mouth. And if you can actually like bring all your attention and follow that, it basically puts you into a position where you're able to, if you can just do that at will and just feel that, let's just tune into it, it stabilizes your attention. And so
it's like optic nerve type stuff, or what's the phenomenology physiologically?
You're hitting your your way your canal works is you're actually so all like it's just you can if you follow sensation, you'll eventually you can follow the contours of your physical brain, and you can go through your entire body. So it's as simple as like when somebody says like bring your attention to your hand. Like just like feel your hand from within. Like you can just do that and you can feel that. And it's like kind of like you're like, oh, that's like a tingling sensation.
It's like an inventory.
But it was there the whole time. So it's like if you had TV static and you're just not paying attention to it or something, it's like, but ironically, this is more like you're turning the static off as far as like thoughts go. But it's like the thoughts never go away. That's the ocean. That's the wave. You're not getting rid of that. Good luck if you think you can stop thought. But the incredible thing is that what my experience was, and I've talked to other people who've experienced the same, what my experience of Vipassana was, and meditation in general, is that when you get to that space, and it's weird to even say get to, because it's kind of backwards.
When the awareness sets in.
Yeah, it's actually the opposite of an achievement, because it's something that you're not doing that's allowing the natural intelligence to do its thing. So like it knows what to do. Like it doesn't necessarily need you to help it along per se. So basically, the visionary part of the meditation is actually like, if anything, it's a distraction. So like, but it will get more elaborate to kind of take your attention away from what you're actually allowing yourself to. Right. So like when you're bringing your attention to sensation, that is a not doing. You're not doing something that you're doing the rest of the time. So it's like, and we don't even realize that you can stop doing this thing. We treat it like that's just the way things are. It's automatic, but it's compulsive, and compulsive is different from automatic. And really, it's the fascination with the constant commentary, not the commentary itself, that's the issue. So it's like, and it's just I'll get these extremely elaborate visions. I've seen like alien landscapes, same kind of stuff I've seen with ayahuasca. I'd get from meditation, where it's so like when you have a vision, it's like the difference between a thought and a vision is that, first of all, it's vivid. It's like more pronounced than sometimes your more lucid, profound dreams. But it's also that it's instant. It's instant. It's so fast that it absolutely feels like something's being shown to you. So like for random example, I like all of a sudden get a vision of like a hound, like a dog that's just like glistening in the light or something. I'm looking at this dog, like an old hound dog, and I'm like, oh, it's a beautiful dog. And then all of a sudden it turns its head, and I see the other side of its face is just fucking caved in with fucking maggots and all this gnarly shit. And the thing is that whatever it is that you're doing with Vipassana, you stay equanimous. So you don't make a thing out of anything. So because it's that, you just, whatever it is that you're being shown, you just like remain indifferent to it. And then it'll just, but it's that funny thing where it's like people do psychedelics, like you want a vision, but this is actually the real thing.
The
It's like,
substrate of it.
It's not that. Yeah. It's actually the space. It's the space. It's the allowance for the space to do its thing, and it's it's a trust in the natural intelligence of the organism itself.
It's almost like inhabiting the event horizon. So it's like you're not at the point of total stillness or whatever, samadhi or whatever that might be.
Right.
You're at the cusp where anything can possibly materialize, and then it's just like don't be shocked by what comes up. By anything is possible.
Right.
So just
go ahead, Rafa.
before you go on, just because I like asking that question, whether in terms of meditation or ayahuasca, what would you say is the main idea that you bring back from that space, especially also the space beyond vision? Because I also recently experienced that quite explicitly already a few years ago, but now recently again. And I almost felt like, in a way, and I'm not really judging, but it's just a gauge, right? As if this no vision space is even a higher frequency, but that frequency is so high that it cannot be visually represented anymore. There's nothing to show anymore.
You have to,
and only a feeling remains. And I'd love to know, if you want to share, what you would say, because I'm always like, what do you bring back from that? You can do it with any psychedelic, you can do it with any meditation technique, but what would you say is the thing to be actually to catch on to?
I would say you can't bring anything back from that, and that's actually the beauty of the thing. So it's like the El Dorado story where they're going to bring back the gold and then it just turns to dirt. It's like if you find something in a dream and you want to like bring it back into the real world and you're like, oh shit, where'd it go? But that's the point is with insight is that there's nothing to hold on to. There is no thingness. And so we see value in things that like existence. Literally, if you look it up in the dictionary, it means to stand out in space. And so when you're talking about like, not something that's not phenomenal, it's not standing out in space, but what do you do with something like that? There's no language for that even really. And so an insight will happen. It's like lightning. And then it's almost immediate that the mind comes in and tries to do something else with it and make it into some other ideology or some other thing that you're extrapolating from it or whatever. And you build this whole thing. And like, this isn't something that you build. This is why it's said, in the Torah that or is it the Torah or is it later? But that the temple isn't to be built with human hands. So somewhere in the Tanakh, it has this expression because you have, Solomon, he builds the temple and he takes materials from another place. It's like, there's a lot of things like that in Judaism where you like try and find these like loopholes. So it's like, you're told not to do something. Why are you told not to do something? It's not because it's some, in certain cases, it's like, there's a reason that's like practical. Yeah. It's because it's not because you shouldn't in this case. It's because you can't, because the temple that's being built is not being built by human hands. If you're going to build the temple with human hands, then you get everything else that comes with that. Flash forward to 2001, you know what I mean? So it's like, what is the ultimate end of that? But like, mammon, it's like, where's the end in sight? Because in the first place, like thought is like idolatry anyway, like in the nature of it, because you're looking upon it. If you're identifying with it, if you're not identifying with it, it's not a problem. But if you're identifying with thought forms, that's the ultimate idolatry. And we're all guilty of it. Guilty for lack of a better word at the moment.
So thank you for explaining that. And I very much agree with you. I was more asking about a feeling, because that's what I felt was a remembrance of a feeling. If there's anything you want to share on that, I can share my story, but I want to know yours. So if you would say there is something or a different in mindset or a shift in perspective that remains, and it's not about information, it's just about a perspective and a feeling. At least that's what I experienced.
Right. So like, there's I don't know if the right word is irony, but there's something about us all being eyes on a larger organism, right? And the idea is that you will experience emotions at different times to different degrees for different reasons, whatever. But the point is that your emotional experience is everyone else's emotional experience, like essentially like
Indra's net kind of thing.
The thing in itself, and that it's actually through yourself, by going completely into yourself in the most real sense of what self means, that you actually feel connected to others. And so, and the irony, of course, is that we're trying to connect with others through finding places of agreement and finding what is, or
through all this
just
idolatry,
understanding each
agreeing
other.
on idolatry.
And
Yeah.
it's all it's like a externalization, right? So it's like this is communicated in several places. Like in the Kabbalistic tree, you have two pillars. The two pillars are Yakin and Boaz. The first pillar is established. The second pillar is in strength. And they say Keter has two right sides. Why is that? Because you're not actually looking at something that, when you represented it and you show it as this symmetrical image, I see where the camera is, a symmetrical image.
Yeah.
It's actually that the one side is replicating the other side. So it's a paradox, because you say established. So here, Yakin, that's where it's established, is on the right. So this is your hemispheres of your brain. And so you're literally like you're and everywhere else that extends to, and how you relate to the world. And then so there's a polarity that's inherent in the Kabbalistic tree in the first place, and that's the Shefa expresses itself as this polarity, which is really twisting. So it's like the way a plant twists, or that like lightning twists. It's like and human beings and lightning and trees. Why is there, this is a thing. So right, like Fibonacci sequence, like ultimately the expression of the Fibonacci sequence, not what we write down on paper necessarily. We can point to it, but it's this thing that exists. And so, and then we replicate that on the left side. So in the same way that our right brain will understand something, it'll see something and get it. It'll completely get it. But then the left brain is trying to interpret it and articulate it and compartmentalize it in order to gain a grip on it. But the thing is that it never quite gets there, because its replication can only get so close to that initial thing. And even that initial thing is still not the highest. It's the thing, but it's closer in the emanation. And so this is the thing, is that the principle of emanation is something that doesn't get acknowledged enough in mysticism, in my opinion, because it's so significant. Because that's a question of like, so when Moses goes to look at Hashem and his eyes are covered and all he can see is the back parts of Adonai, so he can't see the face of the thing. Why can't he see the face of the thing? Because he is the face of the thing. You can't turn around and look at yourself. You're looking from here. So it's a matter of vantage point. So that's meditation. That's why you follow sensation, because you're going towards the source. You're not turning around to look at the source. Big difference. You get what I'm saying?
Yeah. And just for people who aren't familiar with that story, I mean, basically Moses is like, I want to look at your face, God. And he's like, you can't do that, but I'll show you my, if you kind of do these prescriptive things, you can maybe catch a glimpse of me passing by, kind of thing.
Right. It's like, what is it? Mandelbrot said it's supposed to be like footprints of God. It's like, I mean, Mandelbrot is interesting, but if you go into Mandelbrot, it's like the whole is found in every part. But the thing is that in nature, that's true as far as dynamics are concerned, in principle. But it's always different.
Representation,
people come out of people. So the fractal nature of but it's not a fucking computer model. It's like this is I see where these issues arise all over the place, where it's like there's this conflation of technology and biology, and I'm very opposed to it. I will say, like, that this not that they don't, it's like you have a serial processor and a parallel processor or something. It's like they're two different things, and they're fine in their own place. But a lot of times people will glean an understanding of something from a technological place, and then they'll project that onto the biological, and the biological is still mysterious. And so there is mystery. And so, like, when you look at the Zohar, they use the word sod for mystery a lot, like mystery is a huge aspect, but very rarely will you see the equivalent word of secrecy. So secrecy is used very, like, way less. Why should something be a secret?
Like if something's versus like beyond comprehension. There's different degrees here.
So a mystery is an open secret, and Kabbalah literally means to receive. As far as I can tell, Kabbals have enshrouded whatever the original conception of the mystery school was, just in the same way that just like language in the first place was one thing, and then over time it became something else. So like that's the story of Babel, when they say they wanted to make a name for themselves, yeah, that's speaking of fame. That's why Lady Gaga did the Fame Monster, which relates to Metropolis and all this kind of stuff. Like that's a thing. There's a fame aspect, but it's also that they wanted to make their own name, because the name itself, like you could say that the 22 letters themselves are a name, and so it's like they wanted, so instead of it, so when people relate to idolatry in that way, because of the way we have religion today with organized religion, we end up missing the point. That is actually a significant point, that it's like, this isn't about, because I mean, the church itself is like, it's idolatry everywhere, and they'll tell you with the iconography how this is distinct from that or whatever, but like when you get down to brass tacks, it's like, well,
the song remains the same kind of thing.
Sure.
Yeah.
Just
Well, it's funny. Go ahead.
just before we go on about the emanation.
This is the topmost talkative Raphael's been in a hot minute. We got him excited.
Well. Nice. So I have been in at least one particular state of consciousness where I could actually see my own face, and even like parts of my face on everything. That was pretty funny, like in a holographic fashion. So it is possible to reach it. I was laughing, of course. I was very happy about that. I was like, it is myself, it is all yourself. It is true. And the other thing is, I have one dear friend who many years ago lived on the Azores, and unfortunately, or however you want to say it, fortunately, had a stroke. And strangely enough, only one side of her brain was turned off, which was the left brain, so the analytic side. And she said, well, of course, then, they had to get in a jet and so on, and all this crazy stuff.
Oh,
but
wow.
she said that those few minutes when she was consciously experiencing that were like the most serene she ever experienced.
Sure. So, there's a TED Talk about that. The woman's name is escaping me, but if you look up the TED Talk that's titled My Stroke of Insight, I believe it was called. And it's about a woman who had a stroke, and it was particularly the left side that basically saying almost the same thing as what you're describing, where if she became right brain dominant, for lack of a better word. Right brain can't be dominant. Like the whole notion of like dominance is like completely removed from what we're actually talking about. It's the problem with language, right? So yeah, I mean,
was she involved with David Lynch by any chance? Because there's a documentary about a British chick who had a stroke and then ended up doing stuff with David Lynch. I think he sponsored her thing. Maybe in a different trip. I'll check it out. Same idea. Yeah. She's like, I had this trip and now I don't know it's real, and it's bleeding through hemispherics. Ultimately, hemispherics became a part of my not way of thinking, but you turned me on to that at some point. I'm not sure which year, because I started straight up, dude. I was listening to, I would be tripping on acid and stoned and growing weed and stuff in like 2014, 15, 16, listening to you guys do Always Record. Now, it was just stuff I'd never conceptualized, like the whole like occult NASA stuff. Right. I mean, that wasn't always you, but all this, the Kubrick stuff, and I'm just like, the fuck, like, because it's like crossing a schizoid Rubicon, but like not drowning in it. So it's like you're functioning, but like same thing with I forget his name now. We were talking with him the other day on Andreas's thing. He's all into Alex Fulton, 237 this, 237 that. It's like
he just stayed at my place. Actually, he just came out here. He
left
Alex a couple weeks ago or something. Yeah.
If I'm ever through hanging out with Andreas, we're gonna grab a coffee or something, or show me Mountain Madonna or whatever the fuck. But it seems that that's the beauty of it. I mean, maybe being in an altered state helps, but it felt like, oh my god, it felt like I was Jasmine or something from Aladdin, where it's like there's a whole fucking world out here, and I've been, or the Buddha in a way. It's like I've been in this like little cloistered thing, and just like, what do you mean? That's how other options are. But hemispherics tended to be something that I felt that you were resonating strongly about, whether you were verbalizing it that way necessarily or not, but kind of what we're talking about, where like the imagination is formalizing into articulation through the like left-right hemispherics, essentially. And in a sense, it's like it's all imaginal, and then we articulate it, and it's doing that kind of Xerox copying, not a Kleepote exactly. I think it's a little more nefarious, probably. That's like the underworld of or the other side or whatever of
well, we're immersed in the Kleepote, if we want to get technical. That like that's what we exist within. That's why I don't actually believe that Crowley was really doing, as far as the Saudi Star issue is concerned, that it is necessarily black magic or whatever. It's literally an articulation of what we're dealing with. So Kabbalistically, as far as the Zohar goes, the Kleepote rule the lower worlds through the 12 diagonal pathways, and through Gevurah. So they enter in through Gevurah from the left, and then they basically influence. But understand that when we're talking about the Kleepote, it's anything that's influencing the Shefa or restricting it in any way. So when we say the outside ones, which is, you were referring to Sitra Akra, that they're literally like, it's like the way that it's described is like when you're pouring wine from a vessel and it would be like a leather vessel, and you can kind of squeeze it so you can kind of like restrict it. So it's like, yes, the flow is going to come through. If you dam it up completely, it'll eventually explode. So one way or the other, this is what's happening, and that's the movement. That's, I guess you could almost call it evolutionary, you know, because it's going to develop, it's going to continue to develop, it's going to do its thing one way or the other, and we can't fucking stop it. In other words, we're giving birth to the next species, whatever we want to do. But then we have this kind of idea that we can like manufacture the next thing, our successor. We have this impulse to want to manufacture our successor, and so that is where we've ended up going with technology, this idea of like building the thing, but the thing is already happening. So that's the paradox. So that's the thing with when we say Yakin and Boaz, when you say it's established and then the next pillar is in strength, that pillar, that left pillar, is actually pointing back at the right for where it was established in. So people treat it that you're like, oh, Boaz, this is the strength. And it's like, no, that's not the strength. The strength is before that.
Echo of the echo.
It's the echo. Yeah, exactly. So if you make a copy of a copy,
just to reflect.
Yeah. Right. So saying you made a copy of a copy, and that first copy is still a copy, but it's closer to what the original thing was than what this is. So we get all twisted. And so there's actually at one point, I'd have to check, but I think this may have been in commentary from the 16th century from Ramak on the Zohar, where he said he's talking about the pathway between Chesed and Gevurah. So the top of the terrestrial pillars. So you have the 7 lower, Sephiroth below, and the 3 above. So you have a pathway that connects, you know, what we would say judgment and mercy. Some people say severity. It's only severe because of our orientation, but whatever. But anyway, so that would be in the European correspondences, or you'd say the Golden Dawn correspondences, also used by the OTO. That pathway is the pathway of Tet, which is in the Rider-Waite strength, and in Crowley's deck lust. And so this commentary was saying, if you want to understand the significance of this pathway, add up the gematria of the 12 diagonal pathways and all will be revealed. So I do that with the traditional like Ari's correspondences, because I was doing this with my rabbi. So we're talking about my life. I guess I've got
we're cool, dude.
It's hard
this
to
is how rabbit holes work.
Whole fucking life. Yeah. But yeah, no. So anyway, but I studied European occultism for years. I was in the BOTA Santa Cruz chapter. It's the only secret, not so secret society that I ever belonged to. I did, you know, ceremonial stuff with them and studied with them for a long time, and then I was introduced to my rabbi. I studied with him for over a decade. So we transcribed the Zohar, you know, for years and years and years.
Found 9/11 in it. We won't get into that yet, I guess, or whatever. But you were tripping on shit, and then you started like pulling out your photos of your kids. It's like, don't worry about that.
Right, but I'm just trying. No, it's context it's or whatever. Relative. But no, it's just. So basically, there's this point where it says that if you add up these 12 diagonals, you'll understand this pathway of Tet. And so I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So I decided on my own after I was with my teacher, because you know this is a conflicting thing. Because I'm like, oh, I want to see what with the Golden Dawn correspondences, even though I'm looking at 16th century texts, because those correspondences weren't supposed to be around until, you know, much later, more recent, contemporary practically. And so the thing is, so I do that, and what it gives me is 865, and I go to look up 865. 865 isn't anything of significance. So, but then I'm looking at it, I'm like, oh, if you want to produce what's called the you know, people will call it the lightning flash, you know, the 777 thing, where you add up all the numerical values of this particular zigzagging pathway through the tree, it totals 777. But when you're doing that, you have to pretend that the pathway of Gimel, the equivalent of G, actually in this case C also, it's where we get the word camel, so camel, Gimel. But to get from Bina, from the supernal triad, to Chesed of the lower worlds, that diagonal pathway, which would be the continuation of the zigzag, if you know the tree and can visualize that, then you have to pretend, you have to make believe that Gimel is a diagonal pathway. So it says add up the 12 diagonals and you'll see. So I'm like, well, here's the 13th. I'm just going to see what happens. And it gave me 868. Which is the gematria of the Hebrew for the mystical pathways of the Kabbalistic tree, Nativot. And so Nativot is, there's only 3 words, if that amount to 868 in Hebrew, of, you know, biblical Hebrew. If we're talking modern Hebrew. There's conversational Hebrew that didn't, this is their own thing, that came with the reform. But anyway, what it was like, what that is profound. What are the chances that it would, so what is it telling you? It's telling you that these are dimensional. So that gimel that's directly from Tiferet to Keter, that's straight the middle pillar, right? That does not follow the order that we relate to in the lower worlds. So is it a diagonal? Is it a vertical? What is it? It's you have the terrestrial, and then you have the vertical. This is the spiritual and the terrestrial. And so
hopefully this is correct. Maybe if this is correct, this can help.
Yeah,
maybe.
Totally. Thank you. Yeah. So if you're looking at that blue line between the yellow Tiferet and Keter, the crown, so that's the G. So when you're looking at the square in the compass, as far as I can tell, you're looking at the intersection of the supernal and the terrestrial as it appears in the Kabbalistic trees. So you see those 6 points. So the compass is Bina, Keter, and Chokhmah, and then the square is Gevurah, Tiferet, and Chesed.
Correct.
And so that in that intersection with the G in the center, and what it's showing you is that we have a direct line to the
spirit,
to spirit, to God. And so Keter isn't the Ein Sof. The Ein Sof is the space in which the whole thing, like we were talking about in regards to meditation, like the Ein Sof is one thing, but then the order that exists, that's like that we're working with, is secondary to that. But Keter is as close as you'll get on this plane. Even though that's still another plane, but it gets ridiculous. But
very ninth gate energy. It's like, we could twist and turn. It almost reminds me a little of I forget if it's you or who, but syncheads at syncbook.com, we're talking more or less about 2000, probably you, or William John, talking about how the celluloid is the monolith, and it's kind of if you shift your perspective, I mean, it's going to be an initiation of that kind in a different way. That's a weird way to put it, but it's like it's representing higher
totally. That's a good way to put it. I love it. I saw Roger Waters one time before his big comeback, and the only prop he had on the stage was a sideways small television set that played 2001: A Space Odyssey the whole time. And I knew why he was doing it. But I'm like, does anyone know why he's doing it? Like,
he did it for you,
you get it? Why is it sideways? I think Rob Agger was the first person to popularize that idea of the monolith being the screen itself.
Right. Kind of like an almost a Marshall McLuhan trip into another level of awareness through media, it seems. I mean, it's like our perception is through evolutionary scales, if you want to put it that way. So it's like, there's the internet's going to change our consciousness, and film is obviously the first kind of step towards that.
Right. So if you want to know why the ninth gate is the ninth gate, it's because when you're looking at the Kabbalistic tree, you have the 22 pathways that connect the Sephirot, that you have 9 above, you have 13 below. 9 plus 13 is 22. The ninth, in this case, coming from above, is Tet, which is connecting Gevurah and Chesed. And so that's strength. And so it becomes a question then of what is strength? So you have Oz. Oz is strength. That's Yakin and Boaz. But then you also have On, the Hebrew On. And so we find the Hebrew On in the Masonic triad, the Masonic Trinity, which is Jah, Baal. So they have Jahs and Tetragrammaton. They have Baal, and then they have On. And On is Heliopolis. So Heliopolis is Greek. Hebrew for Heliopolis is On. And so it was said that there was basically Egyptian rabbis for all intents and purposes. So there
Atlantean, possibly, or however you want to trip out on that.
I don't know. That's Plato, right? Didn't Plato say that he got that from Egyptian priests? Is that the idea? I don't know.
I just smell the perfume. I don't buy it. I have no clue.
But but it's raw. It's an eye. It's the that's the thing. So but like, interestingly, like, On is also a Hebrew word meaning strength, but it's also idolatry. And so, like, and lust, not in just the sexual sense, like, whatever, but in the sense of conquest, of acquisition, acquisitiveness. So it's this different relationship to sex, not just sex in itself, not the thing in itself, but the ambitious movement that
Possessiveness,
yeah,
essentially.
possessiveness, sure, exactly. And so that is
Isn't that our
that
guilty crime of all of us being idolaters of possessing the thing that can't be named or whatever in a weird way?
right,
What we were talking about earlier. Seems
totally.
like we're
So
all guilty of it. Our
yeah,
consciousness is the witness trying to grasp, perceive, if you want to put witness and whatever.
yeah.
Anyway, go
So
ahead.
that pathway of Tet, like that's the archway. So you like when you say the stone that the builders rejected, what is that in reference to? That's in reference to an archway that has a center stone, and and that center stone takes the weight of the archway. So
Load
to
bearing,
say
yeah.
the builders, who are the builders? The builders of
Masons.
the well not yeah yes and those structuring the sustaining order of the empire as we know it. And so the idea is that this is Shakina. This is a sacred feminine. It's a feminine aspect of Tetragrammaton, and that's what's pushed to the base of the tree as Malkut. So Malkut is the daughter, Bina is the mother. They're the two Hays of Tetragrammaton. And so, you know, the idea is that when we're looking at the Kabbalistic tree, we're not looking at it in its ultimate form. We're looking, when we represent it, the way that we show that with Malkut at the base is that it is a debasement and it comes with the fall in Rosemary's Baby
Perception.
terminology. So yeah, so the idea is that it all comes down to what our actual ultimate notion is of what constitutes strength. And so that's the significance of that pathway. That's why it's that text is saying that if you want to understand this pathway, the horizontal pathway, add up the 12 diagonals, it'll be revealed, because when you do that, you see the significance of the vertical pathway. And if you know the significance of the vertical pathway, then you see what is this then? Because what this is that we've basically defined through our own will or our own unconsciousness or whatever, what we view as strength. And we see that reflected through all of society. And so the strength is in the thing in itself. It's the actual organism's intelligence. And so my understanding is when you look at the shit that's playing out in the world, on one level or another, like everything that's going on is it's basically this asserting of what we believe strength to be, and we're all supposed to just go along with that. So like, you know, that's Dr. Strangelove. That's you know what I mean? Like
film.
that but the idea is that, you know, there's all
it's
these
like Nietzschean,
assumptions
kind of, where it's like power through will and assertion, essentially.
Right.
And what you're kind of saying more is there's a sustaining order that is I mean, it's almost the Christ thing where it's like, you know, the last shall be first, the first shall be last kind of thing. I mean, it's got to flip its head.
Well, that
in
relates
real
to Jubilee, actually, that one.
Dude, okay, so you'll trip out on this sync. I was talking about this with not Alex, Frank Zero. When you weren't there the other day, I was there, and so was Raphael. And it was like, damn, I wish you were here, but you weren't. Anyway, the Wizard of Oz ones. But I was talking to Frank right before. He's over in New Orleans. If I fly out of New Orleans for whatever reason, I'll hang out with him. But on Mobile Bay, it's one of two places in the world apparently where they have what's called a Jubilee, and he thought. I knew it essentially because of the 70-year kind of calendar reset through your kind of research, more or less, and just Christian awareness. And then he was thinking like a bear jamboree, like, yeah, we're gonna have a Jubilee, you know, or, you know, a party or whatever, which it is, but that's not like the full picture. Here, apparently, something happens. I should almost look at it. I'm gonna botch this, but basically, very few places have this, and I don't understand the conditions exactly, but it's like something happens in the air pressure and the water pressure, and basically all the oxygen gets sucked out of the fucking water for the animals, and they all die like en masse. And then all of a sudden you just have crabs and shrimp and fish floating. So it's like, grab your baskets, guys, because there's all you can eat with seafood right here. And it's like called a Jubilee. Anyway, I didn't mean to cut you off about the Jubilee, but it's like,
I don't think
you
you did.
mention. So what was the train of thought on that? I totally spaced now because I clearly took us into Jubilee land, but
Jubilee is very relatable for a variety of reasons.
To the inverse power dynamic we were talking about Christ. That's what you're saying.
So I don't know how much of a basis this actually has, but I can't help when I've looked at the older pre-Margaret Mead anthropology, when they're looking at, say, like the scapegoat ritual, you know, like scapegoat ritual Jewish people did. People had the Jubilee. In the ancient world, they do different versions of scapegoat ritual that relate to the killing of the king. So, you know, basically the scapegoat didn't used to be innocent until the advent of Christianity. So the idea of having a scapegoat that's actually innocent, as far as I know, wasn't a traditional one until 2,000 years ago. And so, you know, the Jubilee itself is the forgiving of the debt and the releasing of all the servants. or you could say slaves. And so that would happen every 50 years.
You could say.
And
There's an economic reset, basically.
Well,
There's
that's
like,
the thing. It's like, yeah, exactly. But I mean, that's when we talk about, people who the mixed multitude in Egypt that was, doing slave labor. Like, there's no chains. Like, we've seen their living quarters in archaeology.
It wasn't American
there's
slavery.
indication that it was like, okay, you're surrounded by wilderness. There's a booming thing happening. Oh, do you want to be a part of this?
Yeah.
It's work trade. So it's not how dissimilar is that from us, is I think the point there that I take from that, just as a society in general. Like, do you want to be a part of the thing, or good luck in the wilderness? And
Yeah,
so
right?
and so
You can
so
play in
like
the woods if you want, but Metropolis is pretty fun.
right.
Kinda
So like with
love
the tradition of the scapegoat ritual, they cut a string in half, a red string. They tie half of that string to a goat. They tie the other half to the temple door. There's actually 2 goats involved. They kill one of the goats. That goat goes to Hashem as an offering. The other goat gets released into the wilderness, which is actually offered to the Klipot. And so so if in 3 days' time after the
Dragons
death
of
of that
Chaos
goat,
get that one.
if the string on the temple door turns white, it means it took your sins with it. The thing is that I brought this to my rabbi, asking him, can we look at anything on the scapegoat, back when we were studying, and he took him a while, maybe a month or something, and he had a stack of his books that with marked which places where this comes up, where they address the scapegoat, and every one of those places that we looked at was loaded with humor. And like humor,
like irony and stuff. Okay.
Joking. And so I was trying to wrap my head around it. I was like, why is this so funny to these people? Why did they find this so funny? This is ancient text on the scapegoat, and they're all making fun of it, but they're still telling you what it is. And it's because they don't have personal salvation. There's no personal salvation in Jewish mysticism.
Correct.
We're a collective. So like sin is collective too. So your sins affect me and my sins affect you, and we all have to fucking deal with that. So like the idea of a soul too, like the nefesh and all the levels of soul, like that is fucking gets crazy psychedelic. This is not just like, oh, you were such and such in a past life. You can share souls, you can build souls, souls can transmigrate. There's like it's not just like, it's not a thing. So you're really relating to the spirit of the thing. So it's like the nature of that is like a whole other level. It's pretty out there. And so the idea of reincarnation, though, is very attached with Jewish mysticism. It's just not nearly the same way. You can have coexistent reincarnation. Like it's it's crazy like that. And so you
got to write some of this shit down, bro. Because I mean, you're like, be like, here's my interpretations. I mean, that's like a tome in itself, right? Like when you got the time.
So just simply put, and I'm not saying it comes down to this, but just on a certain level, one can make a pretty good argument that what we're looking at, and at least the gospel, I don't know, speaking to the rest of the canon of the New Testament, but at least the gospel, that you're looking at largely a combination of the scapegoat ritual in Judaism, in Jewish mysticism of old, and you're looking at the prophecy described in the book of Isaiah being brought to fruition. So in a certain way. So the idea is that, as far as I think it was Joseph Atwill, who I don't agree with everything that he has to say, but I think
even a wrong clock is right sometimes.
But in that book, Caesar's Messiah, some of his extrapolations I feel are inappropriate to be so assertive with his jump to conclusions, Matt. But the basic idea ideas that he presents regarding Josephus Flavius, his potential role in the gospel and all of that, like I think that's
compelling.
It's probably true. On a basic level, that Josephus Flavius had a role in the writing of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Like that seems like he sets up a pretty solid argument for that. It would of course be a panel of Romans, but he was like the leading scholar of the Jewish people at that time, who actually was essentially made into a Caesar. So he was like, in a sense, adopted into the royal court in the midst of 100-year war, where there were killing people. So he obviously
He
submitted.
had a trump card
And
of some kind.
yeah, so
Yeah.
he probably was in a compromised situation where he was basically like, in order not just to keep my own life, but I will, make the best of this situation. So I feel like there's things that are in
I'll be the
Matthew, Mark,
scapegoat.
Luke, and John. Totally. So yeah, so he was like, so this the idea that it was being used as a war tactic. So everywhere that the Romans would conquer, they would change the structure of the cities to be these 36 square mile grids. They
Babylonian
were
sun.
never able to
I learned
change
about all this through
Jerusalem,
you.
which is
Yeah.
one of the things that makes Jerusalem so significant to this day, is just the very structure of that area, that they were able to maintain the structure when the Romans would just,
Level
change
stuff.
places. Yeah, they would change places in a lot of ways, in heavy ways, And so, but the idea is that, if you're put in that position, what is the best way that you can navigate it? And so like that principle right there, I see in a lot of different places from a lot of different people. Kubrick is one of them, where you're basically like, Bernie Sanders is one of them. I could talk mad shit about things that piss me off about Bernie Sanders, but I will tell you this: before he ran, he said outright that he was a political sheepdog. And I'd never heard the term before. I was like, what's a political sheepdog? You look it up. It's like somebody that gears everybody up, gets them all excited, then drops out and hands. So they'll have to go to the next. And it's like, but he was in a very difficult position, because he was like, I want to say all these things. Give me a platform. That I think his main ambition was his bill. He was like, okay, well, maybe I won't be president, but at least my health care bill can have
Legacy.
a chance,
Give me something.
And so so it's just this idea that it's like somebody's not like, no, they're not a good guy, in that sense, that everything that they're just, gonna fucking, whatever it takes. I'm just not MLK or a Mahatma Gandhi or whatever, like, these people who are like, I'm going against
moral
the grain.
heroes.
Yeah, moral heroes. But he's like, I have something that I want to do.
I have an agenda,
what do
and
I
it
have
will
to
go
do to
through
get
if
there?
I do X. Yeah.
It's so guarded. All of that shit is so guarded. The idea of getting anyone in any position of power that actually genuinely cares about
Mr. Smith goes to Washington, right? It's like idealists get co-opted pretty quickly, and then it just is what it is, it seems. Until there's enough of a sea change. That's a good Beck album, by the way. There's enough of a sea change that it seems like zeitgeist. See, something I used to do on acid that was a lot of fun, and I suggest you could do it sober too, is watch Mandelbrot tours. And you can just see the chaos math of the thing, where it's like, look, there's static. It's minimal kind of fringe element, vibrate, change, if you want to put it that way. And then there's just like rapid and exponential shift. And that seems to be, I mean, if it's happening in math, it seems to be replete within the nature of the Tao itself at some level, although we can't give it a name, as Alan Watts would say. So it's just like, it's hard to really, perfectly pin the tail on the donkey here, but it seems like we're living in a dream of maths that have archetypal like ghost sheets on it or something. I'm not exactly sure how to model this in my own mind, but I'm totally spacing. Something that you got into at one point, and I'm curious about, because it was, I think, it's an Indian philosophy. I think it was, it begins with a V, maybe. Neti Neti is where I learned it from you.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Where it's like
that's Patanjali, yeah.
All right, maybe we're looping all back. We don't have to talk about it forever, but you were talking about not Vipassana. What were the two schools? It's like
Vedanta,
Vedantists and anti-Vedantists, or whatever
and
the fuck
Samkhya's. Yeah. So basically, neti is a term that's used in Sanskrit in the Yoga Sutras, that is literally means not this. And so the path of negation is
like the cynical philosophy.
Is the real path of affirmation. So they never affirm, like, say what God is. The best that you can do is keep going deeper into what God isn't and negating it.
Like, so the Tao, like, can be named, kind of thing.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, so that's a central practice in Gyan yoga. Yeah.
Okay. Because I mean, I haven't been to India. Raphael has. At some point, I imagine I will, just because I have some astrological aspects there that are like, you should come out here and do some shit. I won't make money, but I'll. It's like a Mercury or Venus line or something. It's like, okay, cool, I'll do that. I'm trying to think of other things that I'm aware of, because we haven't touched at all upon your art, which is behind you at some level. When did you start making the symmetrical kind of mixed media vomit of awesome, like culture? Like, I don't even know how you would describe your art, go for it
Well,
on that front.
I was doing like small, like Photoshop. I got an editing program, Adobe, from a friend, and it just had Photoshop in the package, and I hadn't touched it for a while, and I was just trying to do my album film sync pairings, and at one point I was like, Photoshop. And so I took to it, and I did a bunch of small pieces for a while, and then I did ayahuasca with my ex-girlfriend, another old friend of mine, Ariel Churchill. She participated in these ceremonies, and at one point she told me that she was going to be assisting. So I was like, well, if anyone was going to clean up my vomit, in that
Sure.
in that
Hold my hair.
situation, it's like, hey, friend, hey, it's. I felt comfortable with that, but then I was also kind of resistant. My girlfriend actually kind of pressured me into it, and
Peer
so she was like,
pressure.
because
Like, you want sex, you got to do the
she
Aya.
she had a PhD at that point. I was with her when she got her PhD as a psychologist, and she had a professor that was really all about ayahuasca, and it told her all these great things about how helpful it is in different ways and stuff, and so she was really interested, and so she kind of pressured me to go out there, and so I did ayahuasca, I believe 8 times,
I've yet
and
to do it. Like Raphael's
and
done it. Keep going.
my
I'm just like, I
my
can't relate.
yeah, so the first time I did it, I couldn't believe that this was even possible. I'd never experienced anything like it. I could basically, like,
More than your math teacher.
I'm laying down in the dark, and I would formulate an image, and I'd just been doing, like I say, like small collage work in Photoshop, just like just a few different things, layering things. But I would cut it out. I cut out an image in my mind, and I would place it, and then I would formulate another image. It's kind of like coming on its own. It's like a visionary thing. So I would get this other image, and then I would organize it in relationship to the other image, and I just basically was building in my own mind all night long. And I could, at any point, I could go back to every part along what I had done. I could back up, I could look at the whole thing, I could zoom in, I could see. I had no idea in my life that I could ever experience that type of concentration. And so it was profound to me. And there was actually another person in that circle who, the next day we discussed it, had done the same thing all night, who also used Photoshop. And so I don't know what happened to that person. I didn't stay in contact with them, but after that first ayahuasca experience, when I went back, I sat down, and I was like, instead of doing the size that I had done, I just went as big as I could think to do.
Sistine Chapel.
I was just like, here's this fucking giant thing. And so, so I just started doing it, and it just ended up expressing itself in this
super symmetrical thing.
This was originally inspired for me from the Masonic tracing board. So I was like, I wanted to do my own Masonic tracing board that was incorporating all cultural things that, at least, that were impacting me.
Resonators
so,
for
like,
you.
So everything is kind of like, it's me, and other people can see. It's media that other people watch and are aware of. So, I would just position everything in relationship to kind of like what I see as, like, cultural stuff. So it's like, basically, it's a Clephotic Masonic board, which is Clephotic for Masons in the first place. So it was just like, if you're going to go there, why don't you just go there, kind of thing. Like, do we really need these old 1800 paintings that are just the same thing again and again? So I was like, and I was also inspired by Lady Frida Harris's tracing boards. So Lady Frida Harris did, like, more kind of psychedelic style tracing boards. So it's like, that was the premise, at least with my symmetrical ones, but so I just go back and forth. And there's this point where I was like, early on, when I was like, okay, well, if I'm going to do this, can't I just do one side and then mirror it, like the whole thing, and then just, like, stitch it together in the middle? And I was like, that felt wrong to me, because I was like, and I actually ended up ignoring the measuring tool for these guys, because I was like, look, like, if your face isn't symmetrical, why should the art be? Like, if my art is going to be genuine, like, I'm going to do it. And so I made it a point to just do it by
bilateralism.
I wanted it to be approximate. I didn't want it to be exact, And I was like, that's a lot more work. I mean, I'm still not having to cut the thing out twice, but it's one part at a time, instead of just doing the whole side and then flipping and then just copy paste. Yeah, exactly.
I'm glad I asked, because I've always, I mean, now that I know they're essentially more magical maps, I wouldn't have known that, first of all, at all. I mean, you get the idea that there's a lot going on. They're psychedelic. If people should check this out, we'll put the link. It's on the his artwork will be on the syncbook.com, I think. So we'll got that link. Check it out. I don't know if you have any for sale or whatever, but Andreas has one sitting behind him half the time. I've seen.
Well, that's my
I've used them
job.
in post. That's your full-time gig?
Well, I work in a print shop slash. I stretch canvases and build frames for people, and with local artists mainly. And there's 2 locations in Santa Cruz, and we're connected, so we're the same business. There's the Tannery Art Center, and then there's downtown. So yeah.
Ironically, it's a fractal of your art. It's like same but different. It's like there are approximately 2 locations. There's approximately 2 sides.
Oh, right, totally.
It's fascinating though. Like I don't know what the themes exactly were. Like if it was like thematic to the point of like this is lust card. Or, I didn't quite catch it, but I've used some of your art on Facebook posts, and it's mesmerizing, psychedelic. I guess ayahuasca visions. I could see that being an influence, though I have yet to partake. So, fascinating. Well, I just wanted to get my 2 cents. I wanted to cover that before you dip, because it's like I see you obviously as like a sync head, and that's how I'm aware of you. And people should check his archives out over the years. I mean, there's gold. When I started quoting people on Facebook, I think I started quoting you and Alan and people just to like, it was like famous people like, oh, Rudyard Kipling said this shit. And then I'd be like, David Charles Blade said this shit on 2001. It's like, it was blowing my fucking skull. Like it was serious.
I love
It's been a while since
I recited If in what was that? 3rd grade in front of my whole school. And I won a poetry competition for reciting poetry, right? And then they sent us to the next thing, which eventually would be whatever nationals, whatever the fuck, for poetry. And then the next one, they only gave me so many poems to choose from. It was like a small handful of poems, and like I chose because my mom had to learn If from her father when she was growing up. So I wanted to do that poem, and then I did this, like they gave me like this patriotic poem about the fucking American flag.
Of all the kids.
I couldn't get into it. And when I went up there to do it, I was like, I couldn't, I spaced. And it was because I had no,
you weren't connected to it.
I wasn't connected to it at all. It's like, it's just not that I have anything against the American flag. It's cool.
After those sit-ins at fucking Santa Cruz.
the American flag is just all right by me, but it was like, I didn't do it. But anyway, what I was going to say with my work, how it's related is that's how I got the job, was that I was bringing in this art. And so I've been working for him for Kirk for over 10 years now. When he just at one point
I've been aware of you for 10 years now that I'm thinking about it.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
And so he's like, you seem like you know how to use Photoshop, because I was just doing this stuff, and I'm like, well, I'm self-taught, so there's like not a lot of, there's tricks that people can do, whatever. I can't do all of that, but yeah, I know how to use Photoshop. And so for the first couple of years, it was all like basically making corrections for people's art and printing, because print you have to use Photoshop. So I was on the printing side of it, and then after 2.5 years or whatever, I ended up just doing more of like the physical labor side of it, which I very much prefer at this point, because I can use technology enough when I'm not at work. I don't want to be just like a
not
computer
Luddite,
reality forever. Yeah.
You're a poet. Let's be real. Jim Morrison's a Sag. It's like you want to play with the fucking the medium itself, not just do Kleepote Xeroxing or whatever all day. So that's the art side of things. I mean, it's the kind of thing, y'all, like straight up. It's if I ever make an album or something, I'll be like, yo, how much is that? Here's $1,000 or whatever. Do something cool. But what's up with I mean, obviously having that math teacher sync you up and you started having resonances, you've got a lot of eddies and estuaries going into the ocean of who you are now. Clearly it's like a lot that adds up to like one thing,
of course. I'm just trying to think of impactful people for me in my life. So my rabbi and Baruch Goldberg and Baba Hari Das.
I think I've seen him speak on SyncBook at one point. I feel like there was a video of him talking about something, and I was like, "Oh, this is the guy you're always talking to." And transliterating the book.
So Patrick Svek made a video series of his Kabbalistic, teachings. Like kind of like he would always laugh at like the idea of like beginners Kabbalah, because his way of relating to Kabbalah, which is how he taught me, was just jumping in. And so, like,
if you can,
like I studied European occultism long before I studied. Is this somebody who I knew who was actually Israeli told me one day, he was like, I feel like there's somebody you should really meet. And then and so I called up Baruch, and I never, I'm like, oh, it's
Stranger.
I guess I'm
Hi.
calling a rabbi. Like I didn't even completely realize. And I was like, my friend Sean says that we should connect. And so yeah, I ended up driving over to his place, and
Made it a
we
thing.
just studied the first day. So we just like jumped into what he happened to be looking at. And then he said, is there anything in particular that you'd be interested in translating, like word by word translating? And I said, I'm interested in the Book of Enoch.
Oh, going
And
for the heavy
so,
hitter.
and so for a while we were just translating like the Book of Enoch, just jumping into
Watchers
it.
did this.
And it's just like, but the thing is that experientially, like when you're transcribing Hebrew, I mean, it's the only thing I've really ever transcribed. I'm not like a multi-language person, you know, but like you go along and it's like for every word in Hebrew, there's like 10 to 20 or more meanings. And you're like, well, which one is it? And it's like, well,
Very
which one
holographic.
makes the most sense? And then it's like, well, but it could be this. And it's like, that's Hebrew. And so when people, the thing is that it's not just like, oh, which is the correct one? Because we think like that when we're translating stuff, like, well, what is the correct translation?
Right.
There's instances in Hebrew where both are included. Both are, they're just two different ways of looking at it.
So
And
it's
that
not necessarily
happens all throughout the text.
It's
So
not
like
postmodern and that anything goes. It's more just like there's a handful of resonators.
there's
Right.
yeah, it is an absolute tragedy to have to translate that text at all for that reason, because you're like, dude, this isn't like, if you want to understand the text, you're considering it from so many different, it does something
Holographic.
to you because
Yeah,
you're like,
yeah.
oh, is it like, so yeah, I repeat probably too much, but it's just, it's so good and actually relates to the Beck thing with IRM. So IRM, if you were to say that with Hebrew, you say Aram, I believe it's Ayin Resh Mem. It's a word that means naked and cunning at the same time. And so there's two verses, one right after the other, where it says Adam and Eve were naked and not ashamed, and then it introduces a serpent who's the most cunning of all the creatures in the garden. It's naked, the same word.
Yeah.
So there's no, like, when you're reading that, you're like, Adam and Eve were cunning and not ashamed. The serpent was the most naked of all the creatures in the garden. There's no reason why you can't look at it any way you want to. And so what is the thing about naked and cunning? So you'll find this whole thing with opposites. And I don't believe that they related to opposites for the most part in the same way that we do now, ancient people. Because when we relate to duality as it exists, it's like a whole other compartmentalization. Because if you're talking about polarity, you're like, there's a polarity between these poles, right? This is a continuum. And so you'll find that in the language, that continuum is like built into it. So in a lot of places,
it's not an opposition. It is a
right.
It's a
so how is cunning and naked two sides of a polarity? Well, to be cunning is to imply that something's hidden, and for something to be naked is for something to be exposed,
hidden or exposed. Yeah.
And so it's this whole thing about like, you're like, you know, well, what is it doing? It says you know, that, you know, if you eat of this, you'll be as
like
gods to know good and evil. Well, what is good and evil? It's duality. And so that's the whole thing, is it's like, but they're already polarity because they've already,
I guess we would have shifted our consciousness,
you know?
at some point. It's like, is that when we fell into the tree at a level when it's not at a different level? Does that make sense? I feel like, because this is when Jordan Peterson, this stuff starts making more sense to me, psycho and like Jungian kind of symbology.
Oh, sure. Yeah, exactly.
We fell into corpus callosum psychology. There's a lot of presuppositions. I don't know how you feel about evolution. I mean, some people are like, Kali Yugas, and there's so many levels of things. It's like, how the fuck are we operating? Maybe it's not there's a lot of static on the wire right now. So of course we can't all be psychic fucking golden beings. It's really hard to do that right now. But anyway, I just totally spaced. Trying to think we talked about your art, and I'm going to send you something after this. I'll text it to you. This thing from the Maru Foundation. I don't know if you ever heard that. You know what I'm talking about, where he's holding that like little shape.
Stan Tenen?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure that's his name. Yeah, he's like, I figured out this mathematical model off of Genesis 1 or whatever. It's like, this is the formula, and if you basically illumine the light, it's like, that's Greek, and this is whatever. I'm totally spacing it. It's been a long time. If you know what I'm talking about, I'll post it in the links for you, Raphael, so people can check this out. It's like 10 or 15 minute kind of like shtick, but sync who are interested in any of this kind of would be down with this rabbit hole for sure.
Yeah.
Highly illuminating. So
totally.
I'm curious about the film album mashup. We can kind of start wrapping up if you want, but before you go, it's like,
I mean,
when did
I'll talk as long as you want. I don't know how long your show is. Is your show
Oh.
generally 2 hours? Is that the idea?
Well, I'm cool with talking until Raphael's in Vienna, so to me it's like 5:30. I don't care. I think. To
Oh,
him
what
it's like
time is it in Vienna right
midnight-ish.
now? Oh my god.
He's here. It's like
Half past
12:30.
midnight.
Yeah.
Oh,
But he's
well, that's not so bad. You got to work in the morning?
No,
No, I never work in the morning.
You never work in the morning? Good for you.
All shows in the evening, everything in afternoon and evenings, if I want to. So it's
Well,
fine.
we won't
And
like
anyhow,
start pulling the
I
plug.
can just go
yeah.
to bed and I'll just leave you guys on and then no. It'll be
Don't do
fine.
that. Pretty
Go as
sweet.
long as you
All
like.
right, so films. I'm curious about films. When did you start kind of being like, okay, shit? I mean, obviously, Dark Side of the Rainbow. We talked about that the other day. Ironically, before that podcast that you weren't at, I was like, oh, I have. Basically, Andreas, I think, was traveling, and he hit up Raphael. Was like, you need to pinch hit host for this, and he was like, come on here, Jim. There's The Wizard of Oz. I was like, all right, I'll go watch the movie. It wasn't on YouTube for free, but there was a sync of, a mashup of Dark Side, and I was like, I grew up with that. That's really the first kind of synchronized stoner thing I'd ever dealt with. Well, before 5 or 10 years before becoming aware of y'all. Kind of like water wing synchronicity and film, very resonant to those with eyes to see, but I don't even know how intentional ultimately it is. It's kind of a weird byproduct of culture and waves clashing in the Tao or whatever. How did you turn on to, because you were like super saturated in that, I mean, to the point where it's like, I think you could probably link up any album to a movie. It seems like it's almost like a special gift or something. I'm like, oh my god, what's your process? How are you doing
I'm the
this?
world's
Like, it
leading
seems-
pioneer in album film pairing. I can authoritatively
I
say
don't
that.
doubt it.
So like
Yeah. You've done
when
like 100 at least. I feel like a
no,
shit
I've done
ton.
1,000, but
More, like 1,000?
online I
Holy
have over
tits.
200 that are available for streaming and download. I do my best to share just like the stuff that I consider gems. I should probably remove it, just like
Yeah.
literally a couple of them, because they're all right. Some of them are just funny, so I'll have stuff on there that's not anything profound. It's just funny, but I want people to see the ones that are like, well, really, really just
Can't
blow
not
your
see
mind,
that.
but yeah, I was
How did you
I was
initiate into
in
this method? I mean, it's
I
a
was in
particular
junior
thing.
high, and I had an older brother, and I was at his house, and he wasn't super into it. He just mentioned it to me. He's like, if you start the Dark Side of the Moon on the third roar of the MGM Lion, then this whole thing.
Yeah, the thing.
And so like, and then it went from there to me, like I paired Saucer Full of Secrets with the Dark Crystal, and I came back to him with it, and I was trying to show it to him, and he was like, and I said, I remember I used the word discovered. I said, I discovered this. And he said, what the fuck do you mean you discovered it? He was like, whatever, man. My brother dropped acid. He was a tripper, but he did. It was
Team
just
Rabbit Hole.
so he was the first person to tell me about the phenomenon. The phenomenon in the first place came from a radio show. Somebody had called in and just dropped that, and so that's the oldest recorded we know that we can find, and I believe it was in the 70s. So I had an older friend that actually used to show Dark Side of the Rainbow or whatever, Dark Side of Oz, in a movie theater back when people didn't care as much about copyright, and you could just kind of do that kind of thing more. I guess you still technically could, but if it got big exposure, who knows? I don't know, but
somebody wants a cut.
Yeah.
Roger's gonna knock on your door.
I was saying, is like people used to sell DVDs of these things online way back when. Like, and I was at the time online. I witnessed the Publius Enigma thing, in the message board, which is like kind of the first case of QAnon. Like QAnon is political, but this was Pink Floyd. Like this was like, basically, somebody, it's
like 4chan,
somebody's like telling them all this stuff that
yeah.
there's a secret in Division Bell and this whole thing, and being very cryptic in the way that it was written. And then they were like, how do we know you're for real? And he said, you'll see in blinking lights on this date. And then it was like in the concert, it said Publius Enigma, which was the name of the person in the message board. And so it was like, it was like, oh shit, so obviously has some connection.
The guy behind the curtain,
and then when they were asked about it, they said that it was the record company, Pink Floyd. Said, I believe it was David Gilmour probably who said it was record company promotional thing that they were trying to be, whatever. Who the fuck knows? Anyway, yeah. So I started with just.
It reminds me of Crowley a little.
It
With
was
the
all
sideways
just
thing.
Pink
It's
Floyd
like, here's a
albums
hint
for
for
me.
those
In the
of us to
beginning,
see.
I was only looking at Pink Floyd albums for a long time, and when I saw that, what happens with the Valley, so La Vallée, Obscured by Clouds. So Obscured by Clouds is the soundtrack for a movie called The Valley. So like Pink Floyd is in their soundtrack. And so if you take that album, Obscured by Clouds, and you play it with The Valley, since The Valley Obscured by Clouds, it does this thing. So same thing. So there was that, and then More. It's the same thing. There's a movie called More, and there's the album called More, and if you pair those, it's explosive. And so, I knew right away that, oh, wait a minute, this is the thing with Pink Floyd. Like, they did soundtracks, like they're a film thing. And I watched The Wall. I'm like, The Wall is one giant fucking music video. Are you kidding me? That's like people are speaking, you can't hear what they're saying. It's even in the lyrics are comfortably numb. You know what I mean? It's like, your lips move, but what do you say? It's like, that's the experience. So now when I do it, I frequently, depending, I'll sometimes go through the whole thing and turn the volume up in between vocals in the film. So I'll take the film volume, and I don't know if you've watched some of those, but a lot of the ones that I put up more recent times are like that. And then sometimes I'll go through the whole thing doing that, and then I'll watch it that way, and I'm like, no, I'll just turn it back to silent. Like that happens every so often, but sometimes it's really needed, and not just needed, but it adds to it. And so yeah, that's
what are some of the heavy hitters in your mind of your catalog? Like when you're like, oh, y'all have to check out these 3 or 5 or whatever.
I got
I mean, you got hundreds, I'm sure, but it's like, what's the one that you're like, this is where people start freaking out a little? Because I know there was like, Sorry Cassandra, 9/11's an inside job or something like that. It was like 9 hours, and I was like, well,
yeah,
it was a while. It was
sorry,
a long one. And then I could handle the other stuff where it's like Tool's the last one you were talking about with Midsommar, and that was dope. I mean, I did that last time I tried to get you on. You're like, check this out, because I was like, well, I don't know what we're gonna. I mean, I know what I wanted to do, this kind of thing, but it's like, the fish needs some bait. I'll watch your fucking thing. Let's do it. Not that I don't want to do it, but it's like, bro, these are like commitments of time. So so in your mind, I mean, it doesn't have to be like whatever qualification, this is the most resonant to you, or this is a good gateway drug for others.
Well,
what in your mind comes to
few do, but Sorry Cassandra, I Misunderstood Everything Predicts 9/11 was a response video to Joe Alexander's Back to the Future Predicts 9/11. And so Joe actually bought me a computer to produce that, because he said, he asked me what my limitations were, and I was like, I don't think I was having issues with my computer at that time. And so he just like, he helped me out, man. And so he's helped me out since then too, in big ways. He's super helpful to me.
He's a dope, nice guy.
Super guy. He basically he helped sponsor my research, basically, and for all intents and purposes, that's what he did. And so that's why at the beginning of every sync film that I do, it'll say almost all of them that I have online for streaming and download. It'll say Apophenia Productions, because I'm using a computer that was given to me from Apophenia himself, so to speak. And so and then I say Sync Book, because Alan and Guillaume have helped me with giving me a place to have my stuff available on the website. So these are people that I couldn't do what I do without. So I feel like every video, since I thought of it early on, I need to put that at the beginning to acknowledge that, along with like a copyright fair use disclaimer. Fair use technically is only supposed to work with American media. So it's an American law. So say I wanted to put something ABBA related, technically speaking, I can't argue fair use for that, but I can make other arguments. I just can't use that one, but yeah, this. Anyway, you asked me a question. Did I lose it?
The Eyes Wide Shut Leonard Cohen.
Oh yeah,
impressive. I was just like, what are some ones that I gotta check out? Like, because I've seen probably 2 or 3, and you've got hundreds, maybe thousands. So it's like,
I really like.
If I'm gonna get off here and
Bitter Moon and Lana Del Rey's Honeymoon. So Roman Polanski's Bitter Moon and Lana Del Rey's Honeymoon is a really beautiful sync. All my Lana Del Rey ones I'd recommend. They're pretty. They're pretty.
She seems like a hard resonating kind of individual. It feels like there's certain people, and I think maybe you turned me onto this a lot. Secret Sun kind of vibes mode, where it's like people are articulated. I think I mentioned this the other day. probably on an Andreas episode when he came on here, where I was like, you got me really turned on, not necessarily astrologically, to actors are like siphoned. It almost felt like people are handled to become archetype resonators. So it's like, here's their career. I mean, like the girl from Dark Crystal, not Dark Crystal, the Bowie Labyrinth
Jennifer
thing. I don't
Connelly.
even remember what it's called.
Yeah, how many
like
peers is she going to walk to the
and
end of in movies? My God.
maybe even in Dark City. Now that I think about it,
Dark City,
Okay,
House of Sand and Fog, Requiem for a Dream. It's a repeated theme with her, and also broken glass, broken mirrors, and broken windows, over and over and over and over again with her. You know,
it seems like we can't escape some of the madness of the dream. I don't know how to process these things. Sometimes I'm like, how forced is that magic, or is this just the Tao,
I really took to Jay Kotza immediately, because what he was doing with the archetype casting. So you have like typecasting. This is archetype casting. This is, and it gets so extreme, the tapestry of it, where it's like, how the fuck did that happen? There's different arguments you can make. You can make the argument that's like the pi argument, like Aronofsky's Pi, where it's like everything around us can be represented and understood through numbers. If you graph the numbers of any system, patterns emerge. There are patterns everywhere in nature. And then he's like, well, then what about the stock market? So million human hands at work, million minds, all of this, screaming with life. So he's like, is that an organism? Is that a natural organism? So when you're dealing with media and the way that storytelling and all of these components, and then stars playing these roles, and then you look at like how Greek tragedy was treated, where they would literally be looking to embody these different gods and goddesses into their performances, and it would get
like channeling.
Exactly.
Almost,
they would channel, they would invoke these characters, not evoking, it's invoking the character to have it come through you. And so like, where is the line between those patterns that we see in nature, the rise and fall of the Nile and caribou populations, and then where is there like with what we're doing that we see is so random, because you're like, oh, there's the will, and so you're like, the will is separate from nature, and it's like, so that's the whole thing. Love is the law of love under will. When we say that, it's the same thing as Yakin and Boaz, because what does it mean to be under? When you say something's under something, if you're talking about a pyramid, what has more power? What's below or what's above? What's below is what it's above is relying upon in order for it to exist. So who has the power? That's always the joke of the fucking pyramid. People are like, oh, the eye on the pyramid, so much power, influence for sure, but no real power. And that's actually the real Zohar. There's only one prophecy in the Zohar, and ultimately put in its ultimate end is that when we have that one world government, which we will eventually, it's inevitable, and will most likely, the second is what I'm saying, is that it will most likely, and what Einstein said, is that it will be the result of one government and a few governments kind of dominating the rest of the world through their massive military strength. If we don't have a one government, we're fucked, and if we do, this is how it'll likely express itself, so we're also fucked. But the kind of the paradox of it is that, or what, I don't know what to call it, but when we reach that end, when we reach that final tipping point where now it's in place, we have the fucking thing, that's the day that it ends, because it can't last. And even Orwell said that, like the boot stomping on the head for forever or whatever. It's like when we actually reach that point where we're actually there, that's such a small group of people, how can they possibly control the world? So it functions up until that point, and it gets worse and worse and worse until we get to that point. And it's not just an automatic thing necessarily. It's just, what do you think is going to happen?
Just put your smart for a second on here. There is even a systems theory law about this, which is called Ashby's law of requisite variety, and it determines that any system with complex factors, inputs and outputs and all of that, can only be controlled by a system that is at least equally complex. And then if we understand how complex even our own minds are, or our hearts, or beingness, it can actually never truly be controlled. And that even the extreme centralization, which many factions are pushing for, may exactly be the thing that then, makes it fall apart, because it's not sustainable on so many levels.
Joke,
it's not sustainable. Yeah, that's the point. And then that's what I was saying before about, like, you gotta, like, what is your definition of strength? Because if the thing that you're pushing isn't actually strong, in the end, everyone will see it. That's why when you look at in Crowley's deck, the Tower card has an eye above it. Like that letter that corresponds to that card is pay. It's a mouth, and we see that mouth at the bottom. But why do we see the I up above it? It's the idea that if something's going to fall apart just because it's exposed, then it's obviously not that strong. And that's the tower.
Yeah.
That's the tower. That's Babel too. That's the whole thing. And so of course, synchronistically, the fucking Trump Tower 16 Arcana, Trump 16. Give me a fucking break. You know what I'm saying?
6 even, no? The streets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, it's
well, that's Kushner's shit. But he ran my
right.
birthday 6/17, June 17th, and Trump, I guess, in 16 in June. So it's June 16th. Announced that he was going to run, and then I was like, in the Bible it says 666 or 616, and I was just like, oh, this guy's no good. I don't think this is a good idea.
Well, he's all about Apollo. He has that whole sun god worship thing. If you could actually,
I really have this room, because I saw once this picture of like golden room in his tower or something.
Oh yeah,
I tried to find the virtual tour again. I looked at it in 2016 of the penthouse suite of the Trump Tower, and it's I looked for it just the other day, and it should be out there somewhere, unless if they just took it down, which is a shame, because it was like a real high definition virtual tour of the whole space, and it's just Apollo everywhere. There's just Apollo, and it's just the sun god thing. He likes.
I think his sun is conjunct
gold.
Uranus, and he's a Leo rising. Raphael and I are. You're actually a Libra rising. If we're going to go with that 242 birth time thing,
I'm just wondering. Just one thing, and you probably know about this, but isn't Elvis Presley associated with this whole thing, like building it up and then also disappearing again? So I'm just wondering if that isn't usually bound to end in like a burning out. I don't know. What Trump faction is planning. I'm just asking. Why is he choosing that archetype, or what?
He's a resonator. You can't avoid sometimes. I mean, it is. You are what you is. Zappa would say. I mean, I named this episode the Central Synchronizer because that's how Joe's Garage referenced the Central Scrutinizer. I think you're like a hub of a very big. I mean, whether you think it or realize it, even people that thanks for having invited David, he's great. It's like, yes, he's a fucking monkey I've been trying to talk to personally for 10 years. I harassed you on Facebook Messenger for years, and you politely would lead me towards different rabbit holes, kindly enough. But then you got rid of Facebook, so I was like, oh shit. And then I had to harass Andreas.
Oh, I got booted from Facebook for 3 strikes. First strike I got was I shared a screenshot from the CDC website on what constitutes a was it I haven't said this in a while.
Pathogen or something?
No, a breakthrough case. So a breakthrough case, because the argument was always before 2020 when it comes to mRNA injections, was that they're what we call leaky vaccines, which is actually a technical term. It's not a conspiracy term. This is from virologists. So it's a problem that they had with mRNA injections. So I basically just posted a screenshot from the CDC website on what constitutes a breakthrough case, and they didn't like that. And then the next thing that they didn't like was that I got another strike for sharing. It was a black woman with a PhD in molecular and cellular biology, and she had one bit of disinfo. She was speaking before the House of Representatives. So this I got from a government website. So I took this video from a government website, shared it on Facebook, and it was basically the thing that she got wrong was that she said, I believe it was 80%. She said a percentage of African Americans who were currently unvaccinated at the time when she was saying it, and she was saying that if you're going to mandate something, that this is and I think she brought up the Tuskegee experiment, and but it was true for New York. That was the percentage in New York, but she said it without including New York. I think she probably even knew that. It was just how it came out or whatever. But whatever. It was just
got you.
That was another check. Yeah. And the last check, the one I think they got me, is because I got removed right after I shared a post where I basically copy pasted what a friend of mine in Israel had shared regarding Whoopi Goldberg's statement about what was it? It was just it was what was it? It's been a while. I have it on Twitter. Yeah. If you go to the very beginning of when I joined Twitter, I actually have it all written out verbatim. I like just reposted it in Twitter because I was like, well, this just got me removed from Facebook. So, but no, it was a whole thing regarding Judaism. And so basically it was because it just happened. So she had just made a statement. So as far as I could tell, it was like everything that I got in trouble for, if I just a few months later, even it would have been fine. it wouldn't have mattered. But it was just like the hot topic of the moment. And I just went out and said the fucking thing that you weren't supposed to say.
That moved.
And so, and you know what the thing is though, is that I will say that it fucking amazes me, especially in regards to Facebook. I'm not going to say this about Twitter necessarily, but I'll say with Facebook, it's like the things that are the most idiotic disinfo without cited references that actually check out. Those are the things that seem to be allowed to keep going, because I never fucking ever got a what do you call it? Not
warnings or something.
I got 3 strikes. I got 3 warnings, but I never got suspended. I just got expelled suddenly. And so, and actually, the day that I got expelled from Facebook, the day and year was the day and year that that Meta lost more stock than anybody in the history of the stock market in a single day. And I heard that a lot of people got removed at the time. And I'll tell you what, I feel like I had fucking receipts. Like if I still had all of that shit, I would be sharing that on other social media platforms right now. You know, but it's like they're not giving it.
Well, it's tricky because I mean, the way I use Facebook is mostly just to, like, I don't know, it's almost like hyperdimensional sigil art. It's like, here's a cool quote that I just read or thought about, and here's art that kind of syncs, and then, well, I want to remember it, and this will impact my psyche enough to, like, kind of gestate, incubate, and hopefully inspire or something like that. That's really hands off. I mean, I think I've been flagged once for, like, nudity or something, you know, drug use or something. Like, it says LSD, and they're like, we don't like that. But basically, it seems the more sensitively, like you were saying, it was a very sensitive topic at a sensitive time, and maybe the crosshairs of how that manifested made you essentially a target for censorship, which is ridiculous. I mean, I don't know how you feel about Twitter. Go ahead.
Facebook is broken for me, at least, completely useless. I always only get the same 3 posts, like for days or something. And also that's why for a long time Team Rabbit Hole actually wasn't on YouTube, because I have also my very particular opinions.
It's like, they're going to censor us, man.
I knew, like, if I say that what I really believe about that, and I don't believe story A, and I also don't believe conspiracy B, there's more. You know, they're gonna immediately ban us, so we're not even gonna start. Right. But now I feel it's much more chill. If there was something really tricky, I'd still only post it to Odyssey. But most things now, it seems they kind of put off the boot again a bit, or whatever this is. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. No, I know that's the thing. Well, I think they're competing with TikTok now. If we're talking about YouTube. And so they're basically, if they don't be as allowing, like, they know that they're going to just lose that traction. They got to stay with it. And so the easing up on copyright supposedly is one thing that I should probably test. Yeah, see if that's true,
dude. If you made TikToks, I don't know. I have it. I don't fuck with it. See, this is one of the things where I'm just like, I don't have time. I'm not trying to sit here and be a social media, you know, Don King or something. It's like, I have a life that I'm trying to live here a little. So just sitting here making posts all the time is problematic. Yeah. So because even even posting your links, I was like, I don't think he has Facebook. Clearly you don't. And you're on Twitter. I just got Twitter just because I don't even know. I was like, I guess I should get it, but I don't fuck with it. But I'll start checking out what you post, and Andreas and people. Like, I just don't. It feels, in a sense, it feels like walking into the Library of Alexandria as it's burning. It's like, I don't know what's value. Like, what am I supposed to be paying attention to here? Like,
I'm kind of a bit of a sucker for like. So I had what's her name? Samantha Geimer following me on Twitter, you know. And I was just nerding the hell out on that, and like stuff like that, like Saul Williams and stuff too. That's Roman Polanski's rape victim. And so I read her book, you know, and I just like started following her on Twitter, and she had political views that I think were, you know, but it was kind of funny actually, because what she would do is she would look for the hashtag of anything related to Polanski stuff. And then she would go, and when people were talking about her on some tweet, they're like, oh, and she would respond, and people almost never knew who she was. So it's like, because like right now I was like trying to remember her name, and I even read her book, and I was like, and like, it's just so funny because it's like people would say some smart ass fucking comment back to her, and you're like, dude, you're talking about her to her. It was one of the funniest fucking things, and she wouldn't even tell them. she would walk away from the conversation and just do that. Like, oh, I'm just gonna tweet for a while, and it's just like fucking calling people out on like on the shit. And like,
Well, if it's
not
happening
the-
at that level, Marina
Yeah.
Abramovic is totally trolling people at some other level. I mean, it's just like a shell game at a higher level. Or whatever.
Oh my god.
That's funny.
Yeah. It was really funny, and she was loaded with the facts on the whole thing. It's like nobody knows the facts better than her.
Yeah,
She
she's
knows
the
she
victim.
knows all of it. She lived it,
Yeah.
you know. And it's
Yeah.
like, and then people would be talking shit to her, like, "Oh, what the fuck do you know?" And it's just like,
It's crazy how that works. And I mean, that's the nature of like history and language and all sorts of stuff. I was listening to we've had Rupert Sheldrake on here before, and I was listening to his trilogues with Ralph Abram,
Mhm.
who I think is a math professor at UC Santa Cruz, ironically, and Terrence McKenna and himself. And basically he was like, I was asked, I don't know the gist, but basically he was asked to go to school in New York City or Brooklyn or somewhere. And they're like, please teach us the reconciled version of the Rupert Sheldrake opinion. He's like, what is that? Because he's a Rupert Sheldrake. And they're like, well, we thought you could tell us because it wasn't lining up exactly. The point is feedback, Chinese whispers, and I mean, however you want to put it, like echo chambers of disinformation. It's so funny how, I mean, I guess you were talking about the Spiral and the Kleepo and the Shadow games. It's funny how purity doesn't stand a fucking chance in this maze of fractality, and yet it seems to be the driving force.
Well,
It's so hilarious.
what is the Kleepo? Like, that's the thing. It's like fucking anything that changes your consciousness in the slightest. It could be that anything that's outside of the emanated flow. So that could be fucking shampoo. You know what I mean? Like, what is going to influence your consciousness? Like, you're drinking a beer, you're fucking doing whatever, you know, whatever it is. There's so much that influences,
It's like
or
anything that can
restricts in
refract
different
the
ways.
light is kind of what you're saying.
So it's like when people talk about like demonology, that's fucking, you know, that is King James is responsible for the most authoritative text on demonology, right? So like, but I believe before the canon was put together. And so he's an expert on demonology. His views or his ideas around demonology, it's like to this day, that's mostly what you're looking at. Like, it's so crazy because you're talking about like something. It's Invasion of the Body Snatchers, the original, especially when he's like, they're here already. They're all like, you know what I mean? Like, people trip out on this whole thing with the alien thing because the way that they relate to it is like they're aliens because they're outside of the fucking thing, you know. But it's like, no, they're outside of your emanated flow. That means it's like you're crawling with the shit. It's like when you look at all the microorganisms and all the everything that's going on and shit. It's like, that's, you know, you get what I'm saying?
Yes, it's a psychedelic perspective. I mean, this feels like when you're on acid and you're just like, wow, there's no end to it. Kind of like looking at your art, some of your art, where it's just like, Jesus, it's just this little rabbit hole, 2001 tie-dye portal or whatever. Well, I don't. We can talk about anything you want. We don't have to go. You're drinking a beer.
It felt like I'm sorry.
Raphael wanted to say something.
Raphael, you wanted to say something. I was going to say like Leonardo or Donatello.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
One of the turtles.
Maybe I missed it, but
You did say Cowabunga at the beginning.
Dude. Yeah.
It's your differentiation, because generally one would say the material world is Malkut, and I haven't heard you mention it. So how would you define that, or if there's anything you want to say about that?
Oh, well, I mentioned it earlier when I was talking about the two hays of Tetragrammaton, because you have the Bina and Malkut. So the mother being Bina and then the daughter being Malkut. And this is expressed in the old royal systems. This is one of the arguments, like when Manly P. Hall says that, you know, tarot is the royal road, you know, as you're literally looking at like this formula of royalty. What we have as marriage now is really modeled after what the royalty did in order to connect nations and to do, you know, kingdoms or whatever, and to do this whole thing. And so, you know, but it has differences. And so so speaking to Malkut, it's like that ties back to the exogamic age. So like when succession wasn't determined by the king, but by the princess. So like the princess is at the center of the whole thing. So like Malkut is the princess. She's not the queen. The queen is Bina, you know, Abba and Ima. So Abba the father and Ima the mother. And then so that is expressed horizontally, but in the upper worlds. So horizontal in the upper worlds doesn't mean the same thing as horizontal in the lower worlds. And that's the significance of what I was saying about Tet and strength and all that. But anyway, yeah, so Malkut is the lower Shekhinah, upper Shekhinah, lower Shekhinah, right? And so when back in the exogamic age, this is what I was saying about earlier about anthropology and the ritualistic killing of the king, is that, you know, you'd have this outsider. It's where we get the archetype of the fool. It's the green man. And so this person who fulfills this role, he pulls a branch from a tree. This is an origin story according to the Golden Bough. This is expressed in a variety of ways elsewhere, but this is the archetype we see expressed in this case. It's at a lake called Nemi that translates as Diana's mirror. And at this lake, there's an old oak tree, and this wandering stranger, this fool archetype, he comes and he pulls a limb from the tree. The limb is symbolic of the king's phallus and the king's daughter at the same time, so to speak. The king's daughter came from his phallus, you know. So he pulls this as a threat to the king. Once he's pulled that branch, the king is as good as dead, because in one way or the other. And so he has to defeat the king in open combat. This is also where we get the suicide king. So the king would sometimes just kill himself in front of everybody, even to go so far as just to stab himself till he dies in front of people. You know, it's like people would bear witness to this. And so it's the idea that you get all the perks, like, you know, Mel Brooks, like, it's good to be king, you know. It's like, but then you didn't have a good ending, because they also had this recognition that it was basically like trimming the tree. So you're going to cut the tree back so that it can endure, because the health of the kingdom is connected to the health of the king. And so the king to willingly sacrifice himself for the kingdom to allow it to be turned on its head. It's not just that he's killing himself, it's that the person replacing him, who marries the king's daughter, who is his successor, is the one who challenged him. And so, like, he turns the kingdom on its head, because there's all these requirements for this person. He has to be of the lowest class. He'd also be an escaped criminal from another land. So, like, this guy is going to turn everything on its head. And that's why I was saying before, why I brought it up, was because you said the thing from the gospel, the last shall be first and the first shall be last, from that parable. But
maybe the origins of it.
But yeah, so this was something that was argued in the Golden Bough that was actually originally censored by the church, because there was a section of the Golden Bough that you can only find like the oldest copies, and then forever it was not available, and then whatever is the Christianity stuff in the Golden Bough, and it's, you could say, pagan roots,
pagan
but
origins,
it's just,
yeah.
but pagan is just civilian in this context. You know, it's like, it's just
they don't
the
like
people.
The prince of the pauper.
Yeah. It's also the royalty too. So I don't even know how that could be pagan. Yeah. So deal with it. But yeah. So anyway, yeah. You see this expression of the scapegoat in that, but it's also not like, oh, the king is this, you know, completely innocent character who's being, you know, this is like, no, this is a willed sacrifice. And so my belief, from everything that I've looked at, that, you know, I say belief like I'm not going to fight over it, like I'm open to being proven wrong very much, you know, but my understanding is that what we see at Bohemian Grove on the cremation of care ceremony that happens the first night, it was the anniversary of the release date of Eyes Wide Shut, was the day and year that got filmed by Alex Jones and John Ronson.
Very
and
cool.
So John Ronson in 2010, he actually produced a documentary called Kubrick's Boxes, which is a really good documentary, by the way. But so he when Alex Jones had a question, he asked John Ronson. There's two documentaries on the infiltration of Bohemian Grove, one from John Ronson and one from Alex Jones, and he's in both. You know what I mean? They're both in both. But anyway, yeah, it's this whole crazy thing where my real sense is that what we're seeing with Bohemian Grove is a reenactment of this ritual at Nemi, with the you know, when what does he say? Fools. They have like, sounds like fucking, it's like Chris Wallace or something. It's like, who the fuck is with that announcer, you know, when they're doing they got a fucking 40-foot owl and the fire and the whole thing and the robes and whatever. But the shit that he's saying, like, I think it's a reenactment of the Golden Bough thing, but in reverse. So instead of allowing the thing to happen, what they're celebrating is the ritualistic killing of the challenger. So they're like, the one who would challenge the king to take over the kingdom. That's like, we take out the people who would emerge. And so, like, I actually believe that fucking John Lennon, as weird as it sounds, was like one of those, because Crowley talks about this thing where it's like so does what's his name? I can't think right now. But point being, King knows that he's going to die. He wants to keep
Time's
it
up.
in the family. What
Yeah.
can he do? How can he deal with this? Send your child away. This is like the Oedipus story in a way. So you send your child away, and he eventually, at a certain age, gets special instruction of what the inside scoop is. So he's not in the kingdom, right? So he's basically like oblivious, and that obliviousness allows it so that later on he can actually infiltrate the thing. And so like there is some weird shit around John Lennon with his dad, where it's like throughout his life, every interaction he had with his dad happened to be April 1st for some fucking it's so strange.
April Fool's Day.
And so like I was saying, he's like I think there's been a lot of them. I think there's been a lot of people that have emerged that kind of had like an argument for why they should turn the whole thing over. Like it's like, okay, now you have an opportunity. You can trim back the tree is all I'm saying. And like instead of doing that, they celebrate murdering those people. And like it's I think that cremation of care ceremony is the most fucking arrogant thing I've ever fucking seen in my life. Like I don't know if I've seen anything more arrogant than that, because you're saying it to like fucking like talk about like idolatry in terms of nature. God damn it, like the cycles of nature. My God, you're like
Nietzschean. It's like
you're
you're
saying
controlling this.
Fuck all of the thing. Like I'm super pro capitalism, but I'm not for unfettered capitalism. Like when GM went down, I didn't think it was right that they got bailed out just because they have fucking all these military connections and all this stuff. You know, it's like what was that 2009 or something? You know, where you're like, dude, you failed. Like you have all these other fucking car companies could emerge on the scene. It's like, no, but we have to, you know, that whole thing. Like I'm super against that, but at the same time, like I'm not against like people fucking being, you know, innovative and fucking making money. Even with the system that we got, it's got its problems or whatever. But I'm like, you know, I don't know. I feel like we don't allow to trim back anything, and as a result, that Gavora result with what could otherwise be judgments, but sweet judgments, we get the fucking bitter judgments. And it's like, and that's the thing, is that like our transition even as a species into the next thing didn't have to be painful. This is how I interpret the fall, when they're like she has to experience pain with childbirth. Eve does. Like I can entertain the idea that it's like on the grand scale, say we're giving birth to the next species while we're simultaneously trying to build our successor, manufacture our successor through technology and AI. We want to have the thing that lasts. We think it's up to us, but it is up to us, but in a deeper, more direct, organic sense. You know, that we're literally pushing out the next child, but that doesn't have to be a painful thing, but it's going to be painful because the way we're generally oriented, and we all have to fucking share in each other's sin. And that whole idea of like personal salvation, I think there is truth to it, but at the same time, to take that as like what it's all about feels really misguided to me, you know.
Charlie don't swim. Is that what came to my head? What? So it feels like, ironically, I had read somewhere recently that the I think it might have been Henry VIII. Ironically, like why is it like culturized in the West largely to be like, woman, lay down, spread your legs, push the baby? It's like there's many other ways to do this. Women do it in baths and stuff, and it's pretty pain free. I'm not a woman, so I can't really relate to this, but it seems like that would be almost a incorporated version of what you're talking about. It's like the forced will on the process. It doesn't kill the baby there, but
this might be hard to find now, but there was a news broadcast of an orgasmic birth.
Oh,
where a woman said no pain, but when they show the husband, they go to interview the husband. It's fucking Nassim Haramein.
No,
and they don't even say it. It's just like it's Nassim Haramein. He's like, I don't know. I got excited. I don't know.
That's right. 64 shaped tetrahedral birth.
Oh, she was like in a hot tub or something, or in a pool, you know. But it's like this whole thing, and she's like, and they showed it for a second. They showed her in the thing, you know, below level, and she's all having an orgasm, and she's just like, it was completely painless. She was like, that felt amazing, you know. And it's like, of course she's married to Nassim Haramein. That doesn't surprise me at all for some reason. Yeah.
Okay, now I got who you're talking about. All right. Okay. Well, that's a good sign, you know.
I'll ask Jamie Janover. He's been on here once before, and he's an interesting cat. But he works for Nassim, or is like his I don't know, town crier essentially, or whatever.
Oh, interesting.
So it's like, yo, is this real? Did Nassim's wife have an orgasmic birth on TV?
It's real, dude. It was on like some local news station.
He'll know where the footage is at some point. So it's like, we can't find it. Go to the source.
Oh, yeah. No, I'd swear by this. I was, I watched it a couple times years ago. Yeah.
Do you experience much Mandela effect stuffs? Because I feel like you're like, I swear by it. It's like, dude, I swear the Berenstain Bears was EIN, and I grew up.
Oh, sure. Well, I'd say that's well. There's areas where I am obviously willing to stand reflected, and actually, it's one of the things that I don't know how true it is across the board, obviously, and Jordan Peterson is a shit show on Twitter, man. It's like, and he'll be pretty reasonable when you watch most interviews with him. Put on Twitter, he's like, what happened? Yeah, I don't know. I think this is an old man technology issue. Like, he just doesn't get it. He'll be having like an argument for like miles with somebody, and you'll go and look at their profile, and they're like 2 followers. So like, I'm pretty sure this person, you're arguing with a bot, you professor. Jesus Christ. But anyway, I'll say one of the things that I prefer with Jordan Peterson to say Ben Shapiro is that I've seen Ben Shapiro be put in a place where he has obviously been fucking, I don't know, I don't want to use the word, but debunked or whatever. And it's like, dude, that checks out, dude, you're full of shit. And like, he won't back down, and he'll just be even more arrogant about it. He's like double downs on it, And it's like, from Jordan Peterson, generally, I've seen him respond with grace in standing corrected. And I admire that in a person, because that's the thing, is that our whole thing about knowledge, man, like that knowledge like determines who, like, that is so obviously like da'at. So like the Hebrew for knowledge is the same word for sex, right? It's da'at. And so that's the whole thing, is it's like, when you're relating to intelligence in terms of acquisition, that you're accumulating knowledge. Not like the whole idea of like the stature and everything connected to that, when like, so that's like that's the real fall. That's the whole thing. It's the tree of knowledge is just that, but it's also like the way people are connected with like your idea of conquest, like how that affects your sense of self in regards to like people's are you sex wise? So like, you're talking about Elvis Presley. Like, the thing with that Jim Morrison would point about Elvis Presley is that motherfucker had like a sex-wise voice at like 17 years old. Like, he sounded experienced. Like Jimi Hendrix too. Like, are you experienced? And it's like, so much of our sense of self is tied to knowledge in the same way that it's tied to sex. And so they're so intimately linked, they might as well be the same thing. It's kind of profound, in the same way that, when you learn a new piece of information, you're literally having to divide in order to multiply the knowledge, which are two sides of the same thing. Nothing is actually growing, in the same way that you're not actually growing. Like, yes, on a certain vantage point level, one can argue that you are expanding in space, but in order to expand, your cells are dividing themselves, and they divide and they divide and they divide further. It's, as Einstein would say, it's relative, right? And so someone's asking how old I am. 41. But yeah,
you started talking about high school. I was like, I don't think I'm 37. I'm almost there. I was like, you were a senior when I was a freshman, because you started referencing certain culture like Columbine and stuff. I was like, bro, like, I don't know why, but I always felt you were much. Same thing with Raphael. He's younger than both me and you for sure. But I'm always like, how are you not older? You have a mature soul or whatever is going on.
I was just saying, like if you don't know something. Notice why kids learn languages so fucking fast. They like pick up manages. Yeah, but they don't get hung up on that. I didn't know the thing. And every time that somebody tells you something and you get hung up on that you didn't know it, that moment right there, that interferes with the integration of that new bit of info. So it's so important.
The ego, right? I mean,
to just like be like, oh, I didn't know that. Thank you. Like, okay, like move forward. What else didn't I know about that? Yeah,
that's the attitude.
It's not about how much do you know and how much can you apparently seem important by knowledge, but how effective are you at learning? And right. So
the full card, man. The beginning and the end. I mean,
Yeah.
you've got to come in like, I mean, the kingdom belongs to kids or whatever, according to Jesus, right? So it's like you've got to have a humble and a curious spirit, I think, is the answer. I want to get you back on here at some point. I don't want to hold up Raphael for all night. I mean, we've been talking for about 2.5 hours, 2:40. So let's start kind of winding down. But
Okay, sure.
if there's but like it's taken me literally years, y'all. So be sure to share this with your friends and stuff, and maybe it will inspire him to return. I would love to hear you talk with certain people, or just you again, geeking out, whatever. If I'm ever out west and hanging with Andres for any reason, I will definitely be knocking on your door and being like, let's trip or whatever. Maybe not trip, but the point
Weren't
is,
you in
let's
like Berkeley or something? Oh, what?
Oh, of course.
was-
Okay, cool.
Oh, you're frozen for a second.
I'm
Weren't you
here.
in Berkeley?
No, I haven't
Oh,
ever
for some
been
reason
out
I
in the
thought you were in Berkeley or something. Oh, never mind. No,
I'm in Oklahoma. Or what am I saying?
Oh.
Oklahoma. I'm not in Oklahoma. I'm in Alabama right now.
Oh, okay.
Fairhope, Alabama. Jeez, I don't know why I said Oklahoma.
Because of the song, probably. Yeah, never mind.
The wind coming sweeping off the plane. But anyway, if there is, it's funny because there was a tornado and I was like, there's a great gig in the sky happening right now for David Charles Plate last week. I don't know if it was a tornado, it was a hurricane basically hitting the West Coast. Glad you're safe. You're an awesome dude. Thank you so much for giving us your time and energy. Straight up,
Sure.
like if I have to be your scribe and just sit there and figure out how to get your ideas transliterated, I feel like there's a lot of gold there for future generations, least of which people like myself who are just like, y'all, this is why Team Rabbit Hole's a thing. Partly, I would say, I mean, straight up, you and Alan and people that inspired me in such a way that got me thinking radically, but also openly. I mean, is the best way. It's not dogmatic. It's very playful in terms of ideology. So I don't even know if I call it ideology. It's like experimental thinking or however you want to put it. So so thanks for coming on. Is there any kind of we'll put your links. Is there any kind of it doesn't have to be an epigram of all time.
I can probably share my screen here, maybe.
Oh, you don't have to do that. We'll put all the links that you need at the end of this or at the bottom in the description or whatever. So we'll get your deets out, your art, your sync book stuffs, all that. Yeah. What's the 2 cents you kind of want to leave people with? This has kind of been a drive-by gnosis on multiple levels. I'm glad we got some tidbits from your past. That's fascinating, and it really explains a lot actually in terms of trajectories. Of course, shout out to that math teacher. He really led the way.
Yeah, he was a tutor.
Yeah, tutor. What a trip. But yeah, if there's anything you want to kind of say here
I'd say the syncbook.com on that
no, I mean personally.
Personally.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Yeah, like
I mean, I'm plugging my thing. I can't plug myself, but actually this is personally. That totally works. So what I would say is what I really fucking like, which I've had happen just recently. So just the other day on Sync Tank, I was like, I have to tell people this. Like, if somebody watches a sync film of mine and you have some experience, somebody told me they watched Sorry Cassandra on acid recently, and like, because it was designed for that. It was the way Sorry Cassandra came about for me was because I went to go see The Shining on mushrooms, and I ate more mushrooms than I normally eat. And the movie, like the lights weren't going off, and then 15 minutes went by, and then somebody came out and said the reel wasn't working, and we could have tickets to go see Paranormal Activity 2. And I was like, "Fuck that! I got my money back." And I was like tripping balls walking around downtown Santa Cruz, and I was like, I need a movie that's the length of an acid trip.
Yeah,
because I was like, because the original tagline for 2001: A Space Odyssey was the ultimate trip, and so like. That. And so I was like, yeah, you got a movie that's 142 minutes, as I was saying, same as Wizard of Oz. So it'd be like, I was like, oh, it'd be nice if like you just had something that had like the structure of a movie, just like and made for acid pace, like, and everything comes together like at the end and has like an intermission and like this whole thing. And like I was like, that's just like, okay, you're taken care of for your trip. So like somebody sent me a message that they just did that recently. I've gotten them in the past. I hadn't had one for a while. I'm not asking for somebody to do that. You can do that if you want. But what I would like is this: if anybody watches one of my sync films, to contact me on Twitter and just let me know what you thought or what your takeaway, whatever your experience was. Because like they're a meditation. I relate to them as a meditation. For me, they're very psychoanalytical, so I kind of like relate to them as kind of like the way that they are a whole. And when you have multiple like rounds of an album, the way that something will have one meaning and then you can relate to it in a different way from the other side, you know, and the way that movies will sometimes shift around. One of the reasons I say that I really like Bitter Moon with Lana Del Rey's Honeymoon is that there's so many twists in the movie that it's like things are opposite. And so lyrically, when you're relating to lyrics on one side of the drama in one way, and then when it flips in the other, I really like that. So like, you know, where it remains, the lyrics remain applicable in opposite scenarios. So you can see the, you know, kind of
there's a through thread, but the tone shifts.
Yeah, I'm really into that.
Because the trip doesn't stop, but it's like the colors change, I guess.
So yeah, so I'm just putting it out there. If somebody watches one of my films, tell me what you saw and what it was. Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm not, you know, I'm a casual Twitter user, but yeah, you know,
I got it for people like you. So this will be, you know, part of my thing. Well, like I said, David, you're a gem. Don't change. I'm glad that you've done your thing. It's not over yet, so you're not dead or anything, but like it's fascinating to see the growth of your bonsai and the trimming of it over the years. Just even from the outside. I mean, I've gotten blocked by Jake and people because I was just big too like on acid about it. But like thanks for not blocking me. It's been a real like achievement in a weird way. I mean, we've had famous people and stuff. It's like, I'm glad we got you on here because you're like the core of what the ethos of this kind of thing is. It was like, let's talk weird about weird shit with cool people. So something I've been doing ironically, I mean, we might as well call it like tea leaves or something, like pulling tea leaves. Yogi Tea has these little quotes or whatever on their tea bags, and today's is saying, let your thoughts give hope, guidance, and upliftment to all. Very bodhisattva vibes, but I hope that people realize that it's possible, and David's art is a good reflection of doing that. You can inspire, you know, when it says be the change, it's like get out there and change the world, and there's a lot of interesting ways to do that, and his magic is ripe and apparent. So thank you so much for coming on. Raphael, you got any thoughts?
Thank you so much. Very fascinating, especially all the things you mentioned about Kabbalah and so on.
A fucking library.
I'll have to listen more. We'll talk more. And, you know, there's all these angles, but, you know, in the end, it's all about, you know, getting down to it, really studying it yourself, figuring out yourself, making your own interpretation, and then getting all these things. So thank you. It's, you know, highly fascinating.
Oh, can I say one thing before we drop off here? That Six of Swords, that was actually an auspicious card to get, because the Six of Swords, that's intellect in terms of you're relating to the suits as sheaths, you know, of emanation. Then you have the you know, I guess it's this to have an intellectual conversation and to have it be at a balanced place, everything towards its center. You know, somebody asked, which film do you recommend? Any funny ones? They're all kind of be funny in certain ways, but I'll say that if something jumps out at you, you know, because I mean, it's music and films. So if there's if you're familiar with the album and you're familiar with the film, that actually makes it better. You don't have to be. It's the beauty of it. But at the same time, if you really are, that's good. The only problem is sometimes people will be attached to their old ideas around something, and to be open to a different interpretation can be a little challenging sometimes. But there's a reason for every pairing that's extensive. So like if anyone was to ever to bring up any random film to me of an album of why it is that I put those together, there'd be a elaborate, thorough explanation as to why, you know.
The liner notes for this exist.
Anyway, there you go. That's just my little.
That's why, yeah. Six of Swords. We've come to a good place on that. Three of Cups. We definitely explored the alien territory of the Hermit card in a sense, where it's like you have brought to light a lot of your personal findings. So once again, thanks for giving us your time and energy, guys. Further up and further fucking in. This is how you do it.
Thank you so much, and thanks everybody for listening.